After dropping my daughter at the subway station on a freezing Tuesday night, our groundskeeper, who has worked for us for 7 years, called me, and his voice was shaking. "Sir, come home now. You need to see this. Don't tell anyone." When I got home, he led me to a basement I had not entered in a decade, and what was inside left me completely stunned. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Atticus Mercer. I am 68 years old, and for 40 years, I built a logistics empire from a single rusted delivery truck to a fleet that moves freight across 48 states. I know how to read a balance sheet, I know how to spot a bad contract, and I know when a driver is lying about a delivery route. But apparently, I did not know how to read my own flesh and blood. For the last year, I have been watching my daughter Gabrielle and her husband Hunter spiral into what I believed was financial ruin. I thought I was witnessing a tragedy of bad luck and a failing economy. I had no idea I was watching a performance worthy of an Academy Award. It was 11 at night when I pulled my Lincoln Navigator up to the curb of the West 4th Street subway station. The heater in my car was set to 72 degrees, but outside the wind was cutting through the streets like a knife. My daughter Gabrielle huddled into her thin coat, shivering. Her husband Hunter stood beside her, looking stoic and defeated like a man who had just lost a war. They refused to let me drive them to their apartment. They claimed they had moved again to a cheaper place further out in Queens and did not want me to see the squalor they were living in. "Dad, please, just go," Gabrielle said, her teeth chattering. "We will be fine. The train comes in 10 minutes. I hated this. I hated seeing my only child, the girl I named after an angel, looking like a beggar. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out my checkbook. I had already filled out the check before I left the house. $10,000. It was a Band-Aid. I knew that, but it would keep them warm for a few months. "Hunter," I said, rolling down the window. "Take this. Put a deposit on a decent apartment. Get Gabrielle some winter boots." Hunter looked at the check in my hand. He is a tall man with pale skin and blue eyes, the kind of man who wears his pride like a suit of armor. He was an architect who had supposedly been laid off 18 months ago and had not found steady work since. He looked at the check, then he looked at me and shook his head. "No," Atticus, Hunter said, his voice firm but respectful. "We cannot take your money. We got ourselves into this debt with that failed startup, and we will get ourselves out. We need to stand on our own 2 feet. I do not want your charity. I want your respect." He gently pushed my hand away. Gabrielle looked at the check with longing, but then she looked at her husband and nodded, playing the part of the supportive wife. "Hunter is right, Daddy," she said. "We have to fix this ourselves. Just pray for us, okay?" I watched them walk down the stairs into the subway station, disappearing into the underground darkness. My chest ached. I felt like a failure of a father. I had millions in the bank. 3 properties and a retirement fund that could support 3 generations. Yet my daughter was sleeping in some rat-infested hole. Because of her husband. As foolish pride. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, cursing Hunter's stubbornness, cursing the economy, cursing myself for raising a daughter who would choose a man who would rather let her freeze than accept help. I put the car in drive and headed back toward my estate in Silver Creek. The drive usually takes 30 minutes, but tonight the roads felt longer, darker. The silence in the car was suffocating. I kept seeing Gabrielle's shivering shoulders. I kept hearing Hunter's refusal. It felt noble. It felt honorable. And that is exactly why it was. So dangerous because it made me trust him. It made me think he was a man of integrity who was just down on his luck. I was 5 minutes away from my gates when my phone rang. The screen lit up with the name Roosevelt. Roosevelt has been my groundskeeper and essentially my brother-in-arms for 7 years. He is 70 years old, a man of few words who tends to my roses and keeps my property immaculate. He never calls me past 6 in the evening. Never. I answered the Bluetooth speaker. Sir Roosevelt's voice was tight, breathless, like he had been running. "Roosevelt, is everything all right?" I asked. "Is there an alarm?" "No alarm, sir." "Where are you?" "I am turning onto the main road. I will be there in 2 minutes. Come to the back entrance. Do not open the main gate, and sir, turn off your headlights before you turn into the driveway." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Why, Roosevelt? What is going on?" "Just do it, sir. And park the car down by the shed. Walk up to the house quiet. Do not let them see you let." "Who see me, Roosevelt? I just dropped Gabrielle and Hunter at the station. The house is empty. Just come home, sir. You need to see this. And whatever you do, do not call the police yet. You need to see it with your own eyes. First. The line went dead. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Roosevelt was a former Marine. He did not panic. He did not play games. If he told me to come in quiet, there was a threat. I turned off my headlights as I approached the service road guiding the heavy SUV by the moonlight, and memory I parked behind the tool shed where the trees would hide the vehicle. I stepped out into the biting cold. The house loomed ahead of me, a massive stone structure that I had built for my late wife, Coretta. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. Now in the darkness, it looked like a fortress holding secrets. I saw the flashlight beam flicker near the bushes. Roosevelt stepped out from the shadows. He was holding a heavy iron crowbar in one hand. Roosevelt talked to me, I whispered. He didn't say a word. He just gestured for me to follow him. He led me not to the front door or the kitchen entrance, but around the side of the house to the old storm cellar doors that led to the sub-basement. This was a part of the house I hadn't stepped foot in since my knee surgery 5 years ago. It was just storage for old furniture and holiday decorations, damp and dusty. The padlock on the cellar doors was broken, lying in the snow. Roosevelt lifted the heavy metal doors. They groaned softly. He pointed down into the darkness. I went down there to check the boiler pressure because I heard a humming noise coming from the vents. Roosevelt whispered, "What I found, sir, you are not going to believe." I descended the concrete stairs, my phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. The air down here was usually stale and smelled of mildew, but tonight it smelled different. It smelled like ozone and hot electronics and stale coffee. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a heavy wooden door that led into the main storage room. The lock had been drilled out, fresh wood shavings lay on the floor. Roosevelt pushed the door open and stepped aside. I walked in, and my breath caught in my throat. It was not a storage room anymore. The old boxes of Christmas ornaments were pushed to the corners. In the center of the room sat a long folding table loaded with equipment that hummed and blinked. There were 3 high-definition monitors glowing in the dark, casting a ghostly blue light on the stone walls. I walked closer, my legs feeling like lead. I looked at the screens and my blood turned to ice. The monitor on the left showed a live feed of my living room in high-definition night vision. The monitor on the right showed my kitchen focusing directly on the refrigerator and the medicine cabinet. But it was the center monitor that made me grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. The center monitor was showing my bedroom, my private sanctuary. The camera was positioned high up, likely hidden in the smoke. Detector looking down directly at my bed. I could see the pillows where I laid my head every night. I could see the nightstand where I kept my heart medication and my journal. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a command center. On the table, next to a high-end gaming laptop, sat a stack of notebooks. I opened the top one. The handwriting was neat, precise, architectural. It was Hunter's handwriting. I recognized it from the thank you cards he had sent after the wedding. I began to read, and bile rose in my throat. Entry 4. 6. Subject complains of headaches after dosage increase. Switch to liquid compound in evening tea. Entry 4. 9. Subject trusts the poverty narrative. Refused the check as planned. Guilt levels are rising. He will be vulnerable to the next financial request. Entry 50. Groundskeeper is suspicious. Must neutralize him soon. I dropped the notebook. It hit the table with a thud that sounded like a gunshot. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely stand. I looked at Roosevelt. He was standing by the door, clutching the crowbar, his face grim. "They have been watching me, Roosevelt," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "They have cameras in my bedroom. They have audio too, sir." Roosevelt pointed to a set of headphones connected to the laptop. "They can hear everything you say in that house." I looked back at the screen, at the empty bed where I slept alone, missing my wife, trusting my children, thinking I was safe in the home I had built with my own hands. The poor daughter shivering at the subway station, the proud son-in-law refusing my money. It was all a script, a play directed from this basement. But why, I asked the empty room? Why go to these lengths? Why poison me? Why watch me? Roosevelt stepped forward and picked up a piece of paper that was taped to the wall above the monitors. It was an architectural blueprint of my estate, but it was marked up with red ink. Lines were drawn through walls, rooms were crossed out, and big numbers were written in the margins. "They aren't just watching you, sir," Roosevelt said, his voice low and dangerous. They are appraising you. They are calculating how long it will take to kill you and how much they can sell this place for. The minute you are cold in the ground. I stared at the blueprint, my estate, my legacy, reduced to red lines and dollar signs. The sadness I had felt at the subway station evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard rage began to form. A rage I had not felt since I was a young man fighting for my first contract. I looked at the time on the laptop screen. It was midnight, Roosevelt, I said, standing up straight, my knee pain forgotten. Do not touch anything else. We are going to leave everything exactly as it is, Sir Roosevelt asked, confused. You want to leave the cameras? Yes, I said. I looked at the monitor showing my empty bed. If they want to watch a show, Roosevelt, we are going to give them one, but they are not going to like the ending. I turned and walked back up the stairs into the cold night air. The father who had driven to the subway station with a broken heart was gone. Atticus Mercer, the man who built an empire from nothing, was back, and war had just been declared in my own home. I stepped further into the room, and the air felt heavy with the scent of betrayal. It was a smell I knew from business deals gone wrong, but smelling it in my own home was a different kind of nausea. My eyes scanned the command center my son-in-law Hunter had built beneath my feet. The walls were covered in blueprints of my estate, but they were not the original architectural drawings I commissioned 30 years ago. These were attack plans, red ink slashed across the diagrams marking the locations of my wall safes, my antique collection, and the hidden floorboards where I kept emergency cash. They had cataloged my life down to the last cent. I moved toward the metal shelving unit in the corner. It was stocked like a pharmacy, but there were no labels on the amber bottles, just handwritten dates and codes. I picked one up and shook it. The liquid inside was clear and odorless. Next to the bottles lay a leather-bound notebook. I opened it and recognized Gabrielle's handwriting immediately. The loops were wide and childish, the same handwriting that used to sign Father's Day cards. I read the entry from 2 weeks ago, October 14th. Subject complains of blurred vision after morning tea. Dosage increased by 2 milligrams. He is becoming more pliable and confused. Hunter says, we can push for the competency hearing by next month. My hand clenched around the notebook so hard the leather creaked. The headaches, the sudden bouts of dizziness that forced me to sit down in the middle of meetings. I had blamed it on age. I had blamed it on stress. I had even gone to my doctor, who told me my blood pressure was elevated. But it was not age. It was my daughter. My little girl was poisoning me slowly, methodically, turning her father into a feeble old man so she could strip the flesh from my bones before I was even dead. I flipped to the next page. October 20th. The keys were missing today. He spent an hour looking for them. We moved them to the freezer. Hunter says gaslighting is working. Keep him doubting his own mind. I remembered that day. I had torn the house apart looking for my car keys. I thought I was losing my mind, losing my edge. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as the realization washed over me. They weren't just killing my body. They were assassinating my character and my sanity. They wanted me broken before they killed me, so the world would believe I was just a senile old fool who lost his way. I threw the notebook onto the table. The rage that filled me was not hot. It was glacial. It was the cold focus of a man who realizes he is in a war zone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the emergency dial button. I was going to call the sheriff. I was going to have them dragged out of their rat-hole apartment in handcuffs I wanted to see. Hunter's smug face pressed against the concrete. No, sir. Roosevelt's hand clamped down on my wrist. His grip was like iron. The old groundskeeper did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the steel gaze of a soldier in the trenches. Let go of me, Roosevelt. I growled, my voice low and dangerous. They are poisoning me. I have the proof right here. You have a notebook with no names and bottles with no labels? Roosevelt said calmly. He did not let go of my wrist. If you call the police now, what happens? They claim the notebook is fiction, a story they are writing. They claim the bottles are herbal supplements for your health. They claim the cameras are because they are worried about your failing memory. He was right. The anger in my chest burned hotter, because I knew he was right. Hunter was slick. He was an architect of lies. He would twist this. He would say I was paranoid. He would use this very phone call as proof that I was mentally unstable and needed guardianship. They are trying to kill me. Hill. Roosevelt. I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. My own daughter. And if you strike now and miss you, give them the weapon they need to finish the job. Roosevelt released my wrist slowly. You built an empire, Atticus. You did not do it by rushing in blind. You did it by waiting for the right moment to crush your competition. I looked at the monitors blinking in the dark. The green light reflected in Roosevelt's eyes. We stood there, two old men in a basement surrounded by the evidence of my demise. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I had to think like a CEO, not a father. I had to think like a predator. What do we do? I asked. We let them play their hand, Roosevelt said, walking over to a tool bench in the corner. He picked up a small black box. We watched the watchers. He pulled out a set of micro cameras, tiny lenses, no bigger than a button. I didn't ask where he got them. Roosevelt had a past he rarely spoke about, and tonight I was grateful for it. We are going to wire this room, he said. We are going to record every word they say in this basement. We are going to let them think they are winning until we have enough evidence to bury them under the jail. It took us an hour to install the cameras. Roosevelt placed them with surgical precision, hiding them in the ventilation ducts and behind the stacks of old boxes. We wiped our fingerprints from the table and the notebook. We put the padlock back on the door, rigging it so it looked broken from age, not force. When we emerged from the basement, the winter air hit my face and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The fog in my brain, the dizziness, it was gone, replaced by a singular purpose: survival. I went back inside the main house, and Roosevelt returned to his cottage by the gate. I walked through the silent halls of my estate. The house felt different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage, and I had to play the role of a lifetime. I went upstairs to my bedroom, the same bedroom I had just seen on the monitor in the basement. I looked at the smoke detector, knowing the camera lens was hidden inside, watching me, waiting for me to show weakness. I undressed slowly, moving with the stiffness of an old man. I put on my pajamas and climbed into the cold bed. I stared up at the ceiling, knowing Hunter and Gabrielle were somewhere out there laughing at me. Just as I was drifting into a restless doze, I heard it. The sound of tires crunching on gravel far down the driveway. I froze. My bedroom window faced the back, so I couldn't see the driveway, but I knew that sound. My heart slammed against my ribs. I checked the clock on the nightstand. It was 2 a.m. Why were they here? They were supposed to be in Queens, freezing in their apartment. I heard the heavy front door open downstairs. They had keys. Of course, I had given them keys, thinking I was welcoming family. The security system beeped once, then went silent. They knew the code. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble foyer floor, followed by the lighter click of heels. They were not trying to be quiet. They were moving with the confidence of owners. I lay perfectly still, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I slowed my breathing, counting the seconds. The footsteps moved up the stairs, closer and closer to my room. The door handle turned slowly. The door creaked open. A slice of hallway light cut across the room, illuminating the foot of my bed. I did not move a muscle. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing rhythmic and heavy, feigning the deep sleep of the medicated. "He is out cold," I heard Hunter whisper. His voice was right there inside my room. He must have been standing 3 feet from the bed. "Did you check the dosage?" Gabrielle's voice floated in from the hallway. It was devoid of warmth. It was clinical cold. "Yeah, I doubled it in the tea. I gave him yesterday," Hunter replied. I heard him step closer. I could smell his cologne, that expensive musk I had bought him for Christmas. He was standing over me, looking down at my face. "Look at him, Hunter. Look at him," sneered. "He looks like a corpse already." I had to fight every instinct in my body to keep from opening my eyes and grabbing him by the throat. My hands clenched under the covers, digging my nails into my palms. The disrespect, the hatred in his voice. It was visceral. He didn't just want my money. He hated me. He hated that he needed me. "Let's go check the basement," Gabrielle whispered. "We need to update the log, and I want to see if the new camera angle in the office is working. I need to know where he put the deed to the lake house." "We have time," Hunter said softly. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he leaned over me. "He is not waking up anytime soon." The old fool trusts us completely. He let out a low laugh and then the weight lifted from the mattress. The door clicked shut, plunging the room back into darkness. I opened my eyes in the dark, my chest heaving silently. They were here in my house, plotting my destruction while I lay 5 feet away. They were heading to the basement, to the very room I had just rigged. I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint vibrations of their footsteps moving through the floorboards. The hunt was on, and they had no idea that the prey had just become the hunter. I closed my eyes again, not to sleep, but to visualize their downfall step by step, dollar by dollar. I would not just defeat them, I would dismantle them. And I would start tomorrow morning with a cup of coffee and a smile. I woke up the next morning to the sound of aggressive pounding on my front door. It was barely 7 o'clock and the winter sun was still struggling to break through the gray clouds heavy with snow. I sat up in bed and for a split second, I forgot. I forgot about the basement. I forgot about the cameras and I forgot that my life was in danger. For that 1 second, I was just an old man waking up in his empty house. But then the pounding came again and the reality of my new existence crashed down on me like a physical weight. I put on my robe and walked slowly down the grand staircase. I made sure to hold the banister tightly, dragging my feet slightly. I had to sell the image. They needed to see a man who was fading, a man whose strength was leaving him with every step. When I opened the heavy oak door, the cold wind rushed in, biting at my ankles, but the chill was nothing compared to the performance waiting for me on the porch. Gabrielle was standing there wrapped in a thin blanket, her eyes red and puffy, from what I assumed was a sleepless night of crying. Hunter stood behind her, surrounded by 4 large suitcases. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his usually perfect hair disheveled. They looked like refugees from a war zone, but I knew better. They were an invading army. Daddy. Gabrielle sobbed, throwing herself into my arms. I stiffened, but forced myself to pat her back. Her coat smelled of cold air and that expensive perfume she claimed she stopped buying years ago. It was a small detail, a crack in their poverty narrative that I would have missed before. Now I saw everything. "What happened?" I asked, my voice raspy with sleep. "Why are you here with all these bags?" "The landlord kicked us out," Hunter said, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. He dropped the heavy suitcases on my marble floor with a loud thud. "He said he sold the building and we had to be out by this morning. We have nowhere else to go. Atticus." We slept in the car for a few hours, but it was freezing. Lies. It was all lies, I knew for a fact. They had a comfortable apartment in Queens paid for with the money Hunter had been siphoning from my accounts. But I nodded, looking at them with what I hoped was fatherly concern. "Of course you can stay here," I said, closing the door against the wind. "This is your home. You stay as long as you need." "Thank you, Daddy." Gabrielle wiped her eyes and immediately walked toward the living room, kicking off her boots and leaving them right in the middle of the hallway. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She was not a guest, she was the owner, returning to claim her territory. Hunter didn't say, "Thank you." He just looked around the foyer, his eyes scanning the paintings on the walls, the antique vase on the console table. It was the look of an appraiser, not a son-in-law. He took off his coat and threw it over the banister. "I need coffee," Hunter announced, rubbing his face. He walked past me toward the kitchen, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. I followed him, my hand in my pocket, clutching my phone. The kitchen was my domain. It was where I cooked meals for Coretta. It was where I read the morning paper. It was a space of order and cleanliness. But Hunter walked in like he was conquering a country. He opened the refrigerator, staring critically at the contents. "You have nothing in here, Atticus," he muttered, moving a jar of organic jam to the side. "Just old man food. We need to go shopping if we are going to be staying here." He grabbed a carton of eggs and a package of bacon, slamming them onto the counter. He opened cupboards, looking for pans, moving things around with a noisy arrogance that set my teeth on edge. He wasn't asking where things were. He was rummaging, taking ownership. "Why don't you go sit down?" Atticus, Hunter said over his shoulder, grabbing my favorite cast iron skillet. "I will make us a real breakfast. You look like you need some protein. You are looking frail." The word hung in the air, a calculated insult disguised as care. I watched him crack eggs into a bowl with one hand, his confidence overflowing. I realized then that this was part of the torture. It wasn't just about killing me, it was about displacing me. They wanted me to feel like a stranger in my own house before they finally put me in the ground. "I will wait in the study," I said softly, turning away. "I have some reading to do." "Take your time," Hunter called out. The sound of sizzling bacon followed me down the hall. I walked into my study and locked the door quietly. I moved to my desk, but I did not pick up a book. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the app Roosevelt had installed hours ago. The screen flickered to life, showing me a high-definition, wide-angle view of my kitchen. From the top of the cabinets, I watched Hunter on the small screen. He was humming to himself, a cheerful tune that made my stomach turn. He flipped the bacon, moved the eggs around the pan. He looked perfectly normal, a dutiful son-in-law making breakfast for the family. Then he stopped. He looked toward the doorway, checking to make sure I wasn't coming back. He looked toward the living room where Gabrielle was likely lounging on the sofa. Satisfied that he was alone, his demeanor changed. The casual slump of his shoulders vanished. He stood up straight and reached into the pocket of his jeans. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in on the screen. Hunter pulled out a small silver ring. It looked like a piece of cheap jewelry, something a man like him wouldn't wear, but he wasn't wearing it. He held it over the ceramic mug on the counter, the mug that had "World's Best" Dad printed on the side, a mug Gabrielle had given me 10 years ago. He twisted the top of the ring, a tiny mechanism opened. A clear liquid dropped from the hidden compartment inside the ring, splashing into the black coffee below. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. He twisted the ring shut and slipped it back into his pocket. He picked up a spoon and stirred the coffee, the metal clinking softly against the ceramic. Then he smiled. It was a cold, empty smile, a smile directed at the mug that held my death. He picked up the mug and the plate of eggs and walked out of the frame. I put the phone down on the desk, my hands trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. I had seen it. I had witnessed the attempt on my life in real time. It wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was murder. A knock on the study door made me jump. "Breakfast is served. Atticus." Hunter's voice came through the wood, cheerful and bright. I took a deep breath, composing my face. I unlocked the door and opened it. Hunter stood there, holding the tray. The smell of the coffee was rich and inviting, masking the poison hidden within. "I thought we could eat together in the sunroom," he said, pushing past me. I set up a table. "It is a beautiful morning." I followed him to the sunroom. My legs felt heavy as lead. I sat down in my wicker chair. The winter sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a beautiful scene, the perfect setting for a family tragedy. Hunter placed the mug in front of me. The steam rose up, curling into the air. "Drink up," he said, sitting across from me. "You need the caffeine to wake up. You look a little out of it today." I looked at the mug. I looked at his face. He was watching me intently, his blue eyes wide and innocent, waiting for me to take that first sip, waiting for the poison to enter my bloodstream and begin its work. My dog, Roscoe, trotted into the room, his tail wagging. Roscoe is a golden retriever, 12 years old, with a face that has turned white with age. He is my constant companion, the only living thing in this house I trust implicitly. He nuzzled my hand, whining for a piece of bacon down Roscoe. Hunter snapped, kicking lightly at the dog. "Get away, you filthy animal. Don't touch him," I said sharply. The anger slipped out before I could stop it. Hunter looked surprised, but I covered it quickly. "He has arthritis." "Hunter, be gentle." I picked up the mug. My hand was shaking and I didn't have to pretend. The fear was real. I lifted it to my lips. I could smell the roast. I could almost smell the metallic tang of the poison. I tilted the cup. Oops. I let my hand spasm. The mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the tile floor with a shattering crash. Hot coffee splashed everywhere, soaking my pant leg and pooling on the floor. "Oh no," I stammered, pushing my chair back. "I am so sorry." My hands, they just gave out. Hunter stared at the mess on the floor. His jaw tightened. A flash of pure fury crossed his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "That is okay, Atticus," he said, his voice tight. "Accidents happen. I will get a towel." But before he could move, Roscoe lunged forward. The dog, thinking he had scored a treat, began to lap up the coffee pooling on the tiles. "Roscoe, no!" I shouted. I reached down to grab his collar, pulling him back, but it was too late. He had already licked up a significant amount. The reaction was terrifyingly fast. Roscoe stumbled back, his legs giving out beneath him. He let out a low, guttural whine that turned into a retching cough. His body began to convulse violently, foam forming around his mouth. He collapsed onto his side, his paws scrabbling against the tile, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Roscoe!" I screamed, falling to my knees beside him. I cradled his heavy head, watching the life drain from his eyes. "Help him. Hunter, do something." Hunter didn't move. He sat in his chair watching the dying dog with an expression of mild annoyance. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look sad. He looked bored. "It is just a dog," Atticus Hunter said calmly, picking up a piece of bacon from his own plate. "He is old. Probably just a seizure. Put him out of his misery." I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. But behind the tears, a fire had been lit. The sight of my innocent dog writhing in pain, paying the price that was meant for me, shattered whatever hesitation I had left. This man was a monster. He had no soul. He watched a creature die with the same indifference he would have watched me die. Gabrielle ran into the room, drawn by my shouting. "What happened? Oh God, is the dog dead?" "He ate something off the floor," Hunter said, shrugging. Dad dropped his coffee. The dog licked it up and keeled over. Probably had a bad heart. Gabrielle looked at the dog, then at me, then at the shattered mug. She didn't look sad either. She looked relieved. Relieved that it was the dog, and not the plan that had been ruined. I picked up Roscoe in my arms, ignoring the strain in my back. He was still breathing, but it was shallow and ragged. "I have to get him to the vet," I said, standing up, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely suppress. "Let him go, Dad," Gabrielle said, touching my arm. "He is just a dog. We can get you a new one. A puppy. This one was smelly anyway." "Get away from me," I snarled, pulling away from her touch. I carried Roscoe out of the room, through the kitchen and out the back door toward the garage. The cold air hit my face, drying my tears. As soon as I was out of their sight, my demeanor changed. I wasn't a grieving old man anymore. I was a man on a mission. Roosevelt was waiting by the garage, having seen the commotion on the monitors. He ran over and took Roscoe from my arms. "He is still alive, sir," Roosevelt said, checking the dog's gums. "But his pulse is thready. It is a neurotoxin. Take him to the vet in town, the one who owes us a favor. Tell him to save him, no matter the cost." "And Roosevelt," I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a wad of paper towels I had grabbed from the counter while Hunter was distracted. The towels were soaked with the spilled coffee and the foam from Roscoe's mouth. "Take this," I said, pressing the sodden bundle into his hand. "Get it tested. I want to know exactly what they used. I want the chemical breakdown. I want the brand name. I want enough evidence to put them away for life." Roosevelt nodded, his face grim. He placed Roscoe gently in the back of his truck and sped off down the driveway. I stood there in the driveway, my hands stained with coffee and my dog's saliva. I looked back at the house, my beautiful stone house that now held two predators. The grief over Roscoe was a heavy stone in my chest, but beneath it was something harder, sharper. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. The image of Hunter eating bacon while my dog convulsed was burned into my retinas. It was the fuel I needed. I wiped my hands on my pants and turned back toward the house. I would go back inside. I would clean up the mess. I would apologize for being clumsy. But I was done crying. From this moment on, there would be no mercy. They had tried to kill me, and they had hurt the only innocent soul in that house. War had been declared, and I was going to make sure they lost everything, starting with their freedom and ending with their souls. The performance began at 7 in the evening, just as the winter sun had fully set behind the trees, leaving the estate in a blanket of heavy blue darkness. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book on supply chain logistics. But my eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window, watching the hallway behind me. Hunter was pacing back and forth, his footsteps heavy and erratic, while Gabrielle sat curled in the armchair, sobbing into a tissue. It was a scene straight out of a bad soap opera, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. Hunter stopped pacing and ran his hands through his hair, gripping the roots as if he were about to tear them out. He let out a groaned curse that was loud enough to ensure I heard it. I closed my book and turned around, adjusting my reading glasses the way a confused old man would. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to sell the concern. Hunter looked at me, wild-eyed. He walked over and fell to his knees in front of my chair, grasping the armrests. His hands were clammy. "Atticus, we are in trouble," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I did not want to tell you. I tried to handle it myself, but they are going to hurt her. They said they are going to hurt Gabrielle." Gabrielle let out a fresh wail from the armchair, burying her face in her hands. "Daddy, please help us. I am so scared." My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl I had protected from the world, and I saw a stranger. She was participating in this charade, playing the damsel in distress to help her husband, rob her own father, who was going to hurt her. "Hunter," I asked, leaning forward, "tell me what is going on." "It is my business partner," Hunter lied, the words spilling out in a rush of rehearsed panic. "When the startup failed, we borrowed money from some bad people. Private lenders, not banks. Atticus. These are sharks, the kind who break legs, the kind who make people disappear. We thought we could pay them back with the next round of funding, but the deal fell through." He took a breath, his eyes searching mine for any sign of skepticism, seeing only the fear he wanted to see. "They called me today," Hunter continued. "They said the interest has compounded. They want $50,000 by tomorrow noon, or they are going to come for Gabrielle. They know where we are. Atticus, they know we are here." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with fake sobs. Gabrielle looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Daddy, please, I do not want to die." I looked at them both, and I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost gagged. It was masterful. The fear, the urgency, the threat of violence. It was designed to bypass my logic and go straight to my paternal instinct. They knew I'd do anything to protect my child, even burn down my own empire. $50,000, I repeated slowly. "That is a lot of money, Hunter." "I know," Hunter said, looking up, his eyes wet with crocodile tears. "I know it is a fortune, but I will pay you back. I swear it. I just need to keep her safe. Please, Atticus, I am begging you." I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane, letting my knees shake. I walked over to the window, looking out at the dark driveway, pretend weighing the options. In reality, I was calculating how much prison time they would get for extortion. "I cannot let anything happen to my little girl," I said, turning back to them, my voice firm but resigned. "I will get you the money." Hunter let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Atticus. You are saving our lives." "I will go to the bank first thing in the morning," I said. "I will withdraw the cash." "No," Hunter interjected too quickly. "You cannot go alone. It is dangerous. Let me go with you. Or better yet, just transfer it." I shook my head, playing the stubborn senior citizen. "No transfers take too long. If they want cash by noon, I need to hand you cash. I will handle it. Hunter, you just stay here and keep the doors locked." I walked past them toward the stairs, feeling their eyes on my back. They were likely high-fiving, mentally celebrating their victory. They thought they had hooked the big fish, but they did not know the fish had teeth. The next morning, I left the house at 8 sharp. I told them I was going to my main branch downtown to make a special withdrawal. Hunter offered to drive me, but I refused, saying I needed to clear my head. He looked nervous, but he let me go, knowing that pushing too hard might break the spell. I did not go to the bank. Not yet. I drove straight to the Glass and Steel Tower in the financial district, where the law firm of Strickland and Associates occupied the top 3 floors. Mrs. Strickland has been my lawyer for 30 years. She is a woman who makes pit bulls look like poodles. She does not smile, she does not sugarcoat, and she has a forensic accounting team that could find a missing penny in a national budget. I walked into her office and sat down. The view of the city was breathtaking, but neither of us looked out the window. On her mahogany desk lay a thick file. "Tell me," I said. Mrs. Strickland opened the file, her face impassive. "Atticus, your son-in-law, is not in debt to loan sharks. He does not owe a dime to the mob or any private lenders. In fact, his credit score is surprisingly decent for a man who has not worked a real job in 2 years." "Then where is the money going?" I asked. I knew he needed $50,000 for something. The desperation in his eyes last night had been real. Even if the story was fake, Mrs. Strickland slid a spreadsheet across the desk. We tracked the small withdrawals he has been making from your household accounts and the credit cards he opened in your name. It took some digging because he is using shell companies and crypto wallets to move the funds, but my team found the end point. She pointed to a highlighted column on the paper. Every single dollar is being funneled to an account in Ohio. The account is registered to a woman named Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller? I repeated the name, feeling foreign on my tongue. Who is she? Mrs. Strickland pulled out a photograph. It was a surveillance shot taken from a distance. It showed a modest suburban house with a white picket fence. In the driveway stood a woman with blonde hair holding the hand of a little boy who looked to be about 4 years old. We do not know the full nature of the relationship yet, Mrs. Strickland said, but Hunter pays her mortgage. He pays for the boy preschool. He pays for her car lease. He is not paying off a debt, Atticus. He is supporting a second household. I stared at the photo. The little boy had Hunter's nose. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Hunter wasn't just a thief, he was living a double life. He was playing my daughter for a fool just as he was playing me. And Gabrielle, my poor, foolish, treacherous daughter was ruining her life and mine for a man who likely had another family waiting in Ohio. He needs the $50,000 for them, I whispered. It is not for sharks. It is a lump sum. Maybe he is planning to run. Maybe he is buying them a new house. Or maybe, Mrs. Strickland said, her voice cold, he is trying to pay off a blackmail demand from her. We do not know, but we know one thing. He is going to take that cash and he is going to move it. I stood up, the spreadsheet crumpled in my fist. I needed to know for sure. I needed to see where he went with that money. Do you have the package? I asked. Mrs. Strickland nodded. She reached under her desk and pulled out a heavy canvas bank bag. She unzipped it, revealing stacks of $100 bills. It is mostly prop money, she explained. We got it from a film supply company. The top bill on each stack is real, but the rest is paper. The weight is correct, the look is correct, but if he tries to spend it, he tries to, he will be laughed out of the store. And Atticus. She reached into the bag and pulled out a single bill, holding it up to the light. We treated the bills with a tracking powder. It is invisible to the naked eye, but it transfers to skin and clothes, and we put a GPS tracker in the lining of the bag. We will know exactly where he goes. I took the bag. It felt heavy, heavy with the weight of the lie I was about to tell. Thank you, Clarissa, I said, using her first name for the first time in a decade. Be careful, Atticus, she said, her eyes softening just a fraction. Do not let him see the rage. You have to play the part until the trap shuts. I walked out of the office, the bag of fake money in my hand. I drove to the bank just to keep up appearances, parked for 20 minutes, then drove home. My heart was pounding a rhythm of war against my ribs. I was about to hand my enemy the weapon he wanted, but I had removed the firing pin. When I walked through the front door of the estate, Hunter and Gabrielle were waiting in the foyer. They jumped up from the bench like startled deer. Did you get it? Hunter asked. His eyes fixing on the canvas bag in my hand, I walked over to the table and dropped the bag. It hit the wood with a heavy, satisfying thud. $50,000, I said, my voice flat. It is all there. Hunter lunged for the bag, zipping it open, his hands shaking. He thumbed through the stacks, seeing the real bills on top, breathing in the smell of the paper. He looked up at me, and for a second his mask slipped. I saw the greed, the pure, unadulterated avarice shining in his eyes. You saved us, Atticus, he said, zipping the bag shut. He did not look relieved about his wife's safety. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Go pay them, I said, turning away so I wouldn't have to look at him. Go pay the bad men and make sure they never come near my daughter again. I am going right now, Hunter said, clutching the bag to his chest. I will meet them at the drop point. You stay here with Gabrielle Locke. The doors. He kissed Gabrielle on the cheek. A quick dismissive peck ran out the door without looking back. I watched him go through the side window, watched him jump into his car and speed down the driveway. Gabrielle stood in the hallway hugging herself, looking small and pathetic. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost until I remembered the poison in my coffee, Daddy, she said softly. Thank you. You are a hero. I looked at her, at the daughter who would sell her father for a man who is using our money to build a life with someone else. I am just doing what needs to be done, honey, I said, my voice hollow. I walked past her toward the stairs. I need to rest, I said. My heart is tired. I went up to my room, locked the door, and immediately pulled out my phone. I opened the tracking app Mrs. Strickland had given me. A red dot blinked on the map, moving fast down the highway, away from the city, away from the supposed loan sharks. He was heading west toward the interstate. He wasn't going to a drop point. He was going to Ohio. I grabbed my coat and my keys, calling Roosevelt on the secure line. Bring the truck around back, I said. We are going for a ride. Where to, sir? Roosevelt asked. To see the other family, I said grimly. Hunter is leading us right to them. I slipped out the back door, leaving Gabrielle alone in the house she thought she had conquered. She had no idea that while she was guarding an empty fortress, her general was fleeing the battlefield and her father was coming for the truth. Roosevelt drove his battered Ford truck with the precision of a tank commander navigating a minefield. We were 3 cars back from Hunter, keeping a steady pace as he weaved through the dense mid-morning traffic, leaving the city limits. The red dot on my phone screen was our only lifeline, blinking with a steady rhythm that matched the frantic pounding of my heart. Every time Hunter changed lanes or sped up to beat a yellow light, I felt a surge of panic clench my stomach. I found myself pressing an imaginary brake, pedal on the passenger side floorboard, terrified that he would spot us in his rearview mirror. He is not looking for us, sir, Roosevelt said, his voice calm and grounding like the rumble of the engine. He is looking at the prize. He thinks he has won. I stared at the back of Hunter's sedan. The car I had paid for, the gas he was burning, I had paid for. The man driving it was a parasite feeding off the host he intended to kill. We followed him for 2 hours as the grimy city landscape gave way to industrial parks and eventually to the rolling green hills of the wealthy suburbs. The tension inside the truck was thick enough to choke on. My hands were sweating, wiping them repeatedly on my trousers. I felt old and brittle, a man playing a young man's game of spies and robbers. But beneath the fear, the cold rage kept me focused, sharp and alert. Why is he heading west? I muttered to myself, staring at the map. He was driving toward the Pennsylvania border, toward areas known for old money and exclusive zip codes. This was not where loan sharks lived. This was not where you met a fixer in a dark alley to hand off cash. This was where bankers and corporate lawyers raised their children. The tracker did not lie. Hunter exited the highway and turned onto a winding road lined with oak trees. The sign at the entrance read, Whispering Pines Estates. It was a gated community, but the gate was open for the day, allowing landscapers and delivery trucks to pass. Hunter waved at the security guard, a casual, familiar wave that told me he had done this 100 times before. Stay back, Roosevelt, I warned, slumping lower in my seat. Do not get too close. Roosevelt slowed the truck, crawling along the pristine asphalt. We watched as Hunter turned left onto a cul-de-sac. The houses here were massive colonials with manicured lawns that cost more than my first apartment. This was a world of quiet privilege, a world far removed from the desperate poverty. Hunter and Gabrielle pretended to live in Hunter pulled into the driveway of a large white house with black shutters. It was a picture-perfect American dream home. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway. A tricycle lay on the grass. It was idyllic. It was nauseating. Roosevelt killed the engine 3 houses down, parking behind a landscaping trailer. We sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. I watched through the windshield, feeling like an intruder in a life I had unknowingly financed. Hunter got out of the car. He did not look like a man under duress. He did not look like a man terrified for his wife, safety. He looked relieved. He looked like a man coming home from a long business trip. He stretched his arms over his head and took a deep breath of the suburban air. Then he walked toward the front door, not with a key, but with the confidence of ownership. The front door opened before he could reach it. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was blonde, tall and striking in a way that screamed old money and country clubs. She wore a cashmere sweater and jeans that fit perfectly. She was white. 2 children ran past her legs, a boy who looked about 5 and a girl who was barely 3. They had blonde hair and bright blue eyes. They ran to Hunter, screaming Daddy with pure, unadulterated joy. My breath left my body in a painful rush. I felt as if I had been punched in the gut. Hunter dropped to his knees and opened his arms. The boy ran into them, hitting his chest with a thud. Hunter hugged him tight, lifting him up and spinning him around. The little girl grabbed his leg, laughing. Then the woman approached. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She leaned down and kissed Hunter. It was not a peck on the cheek. It was a kiss of deep familiarity and possession. A wife welcoming her husband. I sat there frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. This was not a drop-off. This was his life. His real life. The life he protected. The life he valued. And then I saw it. The moment that broke me. Completely. Hunter reached into the back seat of his car and pulled out the heavy canvas bank bag, the $50,000 I had just given him, the money I had handed over to save my daughter from imaginary thugs. He handed the bag to the woman. She took it with a laugh, bouncing it in her hand like it was a bag of groceries. She didn't look inside. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. She kissed him again, and they walked arm in arm toward the house, the children skipping ahead of them. The racial dynamic of the scene hit me with the force of a physical blow. This man had married my black daughter, entered my home, eaten at my table, and called me father, all while building a white fortress funded by our labor. He did not just want my money. He viewed us as livestock. We were a resource to be harvested to feed his real kin. The disrespect was absolute. It was a hate crime, disguised as a marriage. He was using the wealth I had built, with 40 years of sweat and struggle, to maintain a pristine, white life in the suburbs, while he planned to bury me and my daughter in the dirt. I felt a tear run down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. I would not cry for this man. I would not cry for the betrayal. We need evidence. Sir. Roosevelt's voice cut through the fog of my shock. He handed me the camera with the long-range lens. Taking the pictures himself would have been risky. But I was hidden in the shadows of the cab. I raised the camera, my hands shaking with a tremor I could not control. I forced myself to breathe to steady the lens. I focused on the happy family on the porch. Click Hunter, kissing the woman. Click. The woman holding the bag of money with the bank logo clearly visible. Click. The children hugging his legs. Click the license plate of the SUV in the driveway registered to a Sarah Miller. I took photo after photo documenting the joy I had paid for documenting the theft of my life's work. I zoomed in on Hunter's face. He looked so happy, so relaxed. He never looked that way with Gabrielle. With my daughter, he was always tense, always performing, always playing the victim. Here he was, the provider, the hero. I lowered the camera, reviewing the images on the small digital screen. The evidence was irrefutable. We had him. But then a new thought struck me, a cold realization that settled in the pit of my stomach. What about Gabrielle? Was she a part of this? I looked at the woman on the porch, Sarah. She looked at Hunter with adoration. She clearly knew about the money, but did she know where it came from? Did she know he had another wife, a black wife in the city? Or did she think he was some high-powered consultant traveling for work? And Gabrielle. My poor, foolish Gabrielle. Was she in on the scam? Was she helping him rob me so they could run away together? Or was she the biggest victim of all? I thought back to the poison. In the kitchen, Hunter had dosed my coffee, but Gabrielle had been there too. She had watched him. She had participated in the gaslighting. She had helped him plan the nursing home strategy. But looking at this other family, this perfect white picket fence life, I realized the truth. Gabrielle was not a partner. She was a tool. She was a conduit. Hunter was using her to get to me, to get to the inheritance. Once I was dead and the money was transferred, he would not stay with Gabrielle. He would discard her just as easily as he planned to discard me. He was playing both of us. He was using my daughter's desperation for love, her insecurities, her weakness to destroy her own family. She was an accomplice, yes. But she was a stupid, blind accomplice. She was digging her own grave alongside mine, thinking she was building a foundation for her marriage. The pity I felt for her was overwhelmed by a wave of nausea. She had chosen him. She had chosen to betray her father for a man who viewed her as nothing more than an ATM. She had served me up on a platter to a man who likely laughed at her behind her back with this woman. Sarah. I looked at Roosevelt. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with the same fury I felt. We have enough, sir, Roosevelt said quietly. We should go before they see us. I nodded, unable to speak. I put the camera down. The image of Hunter laughing with that bag of money was burned into my retinas. It would fuel me. It would keep me warm in the cold nights ahead. Let's go, Roosevelt, I said, my voice raspy. Turn the truck around. We drove out of Whispering Pines, leaving the happy family to count their loot. They thought they were safe. They thought the old man was back in his mansion, crying over his debts and comforting his scared daughter. They had no idea that the ATM had just developed a memory and a thirst for vengeance. As we hit the highway, I pulled out my phone. I looked at the tracking app. The dot was stationary at the house in the suburbs. I turned off the screen. The drive back was silent, but my mind was loud. I was formulating the next steps: the lawyer, the police, the confrontation. But first, I had to go back to that house. I had to walk through the front door and look my daughter in the eye, knowing she was either a monster or a fool, and I had to act like I knew nothing. I had to be the old man for just a little while longer. But inside, the old man was dead. In his place was a force of nature, and the storm was just beginning to break. I pulled my truck into the garage next to my empty spot where the luxury SUV usually sat and turned off the engine. The silence of the garage felt heavy, oppressive like the air before a thunderstorm. Roosevelt had stayed behind in his cottage to monitor the feeds, but I needed to face them alone. I needed them to see my face and think they were looking at a victim, not an executioner. I walked into the house through the kitchen entrance. The house was quiet, too quiet. I expected to hear the television or Hunter moving around in the kitchen celebrating his $50,000 victory. But there was nothing, just a stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I walked toward the stairs, my hand gripping the banister tight. The wood felt cold under my palm. I climbed slowly, making sure my footsteps were heavy, audible, announcing my presence. I wanted them to know the old man was home. When I reached the top of the landing, I saw it. The door to my bedroom was wide open, light spilling out into the hallway. My heart gave a painful thud. I walked faster, forgetting my limp for a second before catching myself. I reached the doorway and stopped dead. My sanctuary had been violated. The room was a wreck. Drawers had been pulled out and dumped onto the floor. My clothes were scattered everywhere, suits torn from their hangers, shirts unbuttoned and trampled. The mattress was half slid off the box spring sheets, tangled like a nest of snakes. The lamp on my nightstand was shattered, ceramic shards glinting in the carpet, but it was the wall above my dresser that made my knees buckle. There had been a large framed photograph there, a portrait of Coretta and me taken on our 25th anniversary. She was wearing her favorite blue dress, smiling that smile that used to light up my darkest days. Now the frame was smashed on the floor. The glass was pulverized into dust. And the photo had been ripped to shreds. Her face was gone, torn right down the middle. The pieces were scattered across the dresser like confetti. A sound came from the corner of the room, a high-pitched whimper. I turned to see Gabrielle sitting on the floor in the corner, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking back and forth. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you do it? Why did you get so angry?" I stared at her, unable to speak. "Do it," I asked, my voice barely a croak. Gabrielle stood up slowly, keeping her back against the wall as if she were afraid I might strike her. "You do not remember, do you? You came in here screaming. You said the house was listening to you. You said Mom was watching you from the picture and judging you. You started tearing everything apart. Hunter tried to stop you, but you pushed him. You were so strong, Daddy. You were scary." I looked at her, at my own flesh and blood, spinning a lie so vile it made my stomach churn. She was using my dead wife against me. She was desecrating Coretta's memory to gaslight me into an asylum. Hunter stepped out of the bathroom. He was holding a wet towel, pressing it to a red mark on his forearm. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, a performance that deserved an award. "Atticus," he said, his voice gentle, patronizing, "we are worried about you. This episode, it was violent. You do not remember any of it, do you? The screaming, the throwing things." I looked at the chaos around me. My mind was clear, sharp as a diamond cutting glass. I knew exactly what was happening. They were setting the stage. They had destroyed my room while I was out following Hunter to his other family. They needed a crisis, a psychotic break to justify the next step. I did not do this, I said, my voice low calm. Hunter sighed, shaking his head sadly. "That is what happens with dementia. Atticus, the gaps in memory, the aggression. You think you are fine, but you are not. Look at this room. Look at what you did to Coretta's picture." He pointed at the torn photo. The sight of his white finger pointing at my wife's ruined face ignited a fury in me that was almost blinding. I wanted to break his finger. I wanted to break him. But I stood still. "I was not here," I said. "I was out running errands. You came back an hour ago." Gabrielle sobbed. "You came in the back door screaming about the government and spies. Then you blacked out. We put you in the guest room to calm down, and you must have wandered off again. Daddy, we cannot do this anymore. We cannot keep you safe here." It was a trap, a perfect, airtight trap. If I got angry and shouted, I proved them right. If I denied it calmly, they would say I was in denial. They had created a reality where my defense was proof of my illness. Hunter reached into his pocket. "I have proof, Atticus. I recorded it. I recorded the episode because the doctor said we needed to document your decline. I did not want to show you this, but you leave me no choice." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A sound filled the room coming from the tiny speaker. It was my voice, or at least it sounded like my voice. It was screaming guttural and unhinged. "Get out of my head. Stop looking at me, Coretta. I hate you. I hate this house. Burn it all down." The voice cracked and broke, dissolving into a string of incoherent curses and the sound of breaking glass. I listened to the recording, my blood running cold. The tone, the cadence. It was me. But I had never said those words. I had never hated Coretta. It was AI deepfake audio generated from the hours of conversations they had recorded in this house. They had taken my voice and twisted it into a weapon. "See," Gabrielle whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That is you, Daddy. That is what you sound like when the darkness takes over." Hunter stepped closer, his presence looming. "You are a danger to yourself, Atticus, and you are a danger to Gabrielle. I cannot let you stay here in this condition. I have already called Dr. Sterling's replacement, Dr. Vance. He agrees that this constitutes an emergency. You need immediate stabilization. Dr. Vance." I knew the name. He was a psychiatrist, known for writing prescriptions for the wealthy and looking the other way. He was the one they had bought. "You are committing me," I asked, looking Hunter in the eye. "We are getting you help." Hunter corrected, his voice hard. "We are taking you to Pinecrest tonight. The papers are already being drafted. This recording is all the proof the judge will need for an emergency temporary guardianship. Pinecrest. It was a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, a place where people were medicated into oblivion and forgotten. They wanted to lock me away, drug me, until I drooled, and then pick my bones clean while I sat in a wheelchair staring at a wall. The threat was imminent. If that recording played for a judge or a police officer, I was finished. They had the destroyed room, the witness testimony, and the audio evidence. It was a checkmate, or so they thought. I looked at Hunter. I looked at the smug satisfaction hidden deep in his blue eyes underneath the fake concern. He thought I was an old man, confused and cornered. He thought technology was his ally, his sword. I reached into my own pocket slowly, deliberately. My hand closed around the small digital voice recorder I had started carrying since the basement discovery. It was old-school technology, simple, reliable, and impossible to fake. Hunter watched me, his brow furrowing. "What is that? Atticus?" I held up the small black device. "You have your recording." "Hunter," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I had been faking. "I have mine." I pressed the play button. The sound that came out was crystal clear. It wasn't AI. It wasn't generated. It was raw reality. It was the sound of fabric ripping, then the sound of glass shattering. Then Hunter's voice sneered from my hand. Arrogant and cruel. "Rip the eyes out," Hunter's voice said on the tape. "Make it look like he hated her. That will sell the crazy narrative better." Then Gabrielle's voice shaky but compliant. "I do not want to tear Mom's picture. Hunter, it feels wrong." "Do it," Hunter snapped. "We need him in Pinecrest by tonight. I need access to the main vault, and I cannot get it while he is wandering around here. Make the room look like a war zone. Flip the mattress. Throw his clothes everywhere." The recording continued, capturing the sounds of them trashing my room, the sounds of their calculated destruction. It captured Hunter laughing as he broke the lamp. It captured them, rehearsing their lines. "Okay, you sit in the corner and cry," Hunter had said on the tape. "Act scared, terrified. When he walks in, we hit him with the fake audio. He will be so confused, he will believe he did it." I clicked the stop button. The silence in the room was absolute deeper and heavier than before. Gabrielle's face had drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. She stared at the device in my hand as if it were a gun. Hunter took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Where did you get that? I was not wandering around, confused, Hunter, I said, stepping forward, the limp in my leg miraculously gone. I was listening. I have microphones in this room. I have microphones in the kitchen. I have microphones in the basement. I took another step toward him, watching him shrink. You think you are the only one who can play games? I asked, my voice rising, thundering with the authority of the man who built an empire. You think because I am old, I am stupid. You think because I loved you, I was blind. Hunter looked at the destroyed room, then at the phone in his hand, then at me. The power dynamic had shifted so violently the air felt charged. The predator had just realized he was in the cage with the lion. That is illegal, Hunter stammered, trying to regain his footing. You cannot record us without consent. In this state, inside my own home, where I suspect elder abuse and criminal conspiracy, I can record whatever I want. I said. I stepped over the shattered remains of my wife's picture, protecting it from his boots. You wanted to prove I was insane, I said, gesturing to the room with the recorder. Well, you just proved something else. You proved you are a liar, a thief, and a vandal. Hunter lunged for me, desperation in his eyes. Give me that. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Roosevelt stepped out from the hallway behind him, holding a baseball bat loosely in his hand. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a silent sentinel of consequences. Hunter froze his hand inches from my chest. Touch me, I whispered, and Roosevelt will break your arm. Hunter pulled his hand back, breathing hard. He looked at Gabrielle, then at the door. Get out, I said softly. Get out of my room. Get out of my sight before I lose the little restraint I have left, and call the police right now. But we live here, Gabrielle cried, her voice hysterical. Not for long, I said. Not for long at all. Hunter grabbed Gabrielle's arm, his grip bruising. Come on, he hissed. We need to regroup. They fled the room like rats, scurrying from the light. I stood there alone amidst the wreckage of my sanctuary. I looked down at the torn photo of Coretta. I knelt down carefully, picking up the pieces. My heart was broken, but my resolve was iron. I put the recorder in my pocket next to my heart. It was over. The psychological war was over. I had won the battle, but the war for my life and my legacy was just entering its most dangerous phase. They were desperate now, and desperate people did desperate things. I had to be ready for the violence that was sure to follow. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only brought clarity to the cold reality of my situation. I sat in the high-rise office of Mrs. Strickland, my attorney looking at a piece of paper that felt heavier than a tombstone. The leather chair creaked as I leaned forward, my eyes refusing to believe what was printed in black and white. Mrs. Strickland slid a glass of water toward me, but I ignored it. My mouth was dry, but water would not wash away the taste of bile. It was a real estate listing. A private pocket listing, the kind that never hits the public market, the kind that circulates in the dark corners of the investment world where vultures circle dying prey. The photo at the top of the page was my house, my estate, the home I had built brick by brick for my wife Coretta, the home where I had raised Gabrielle. It was listed for $2 million. The property alone was worth $6 million. The house and contents were worth $10 million. They were selling my legacy for pennies on the dollar just to get liquid cash fast. This was posted 3 hours ago on an encrypted investor forum. Mrs. Strickland said, her voice sharp and professional. It is a fire sale, Atticus. They are asking for an all-cash, quick close, no inspections, no walkthroughs, just a wire transfer and a deed. Looked at the bottom of the document, and that is where my heart truly broke. There was a signature. It was my name, Atticus Mercer. But it was not my signature. It was a forgery, but it was a specific kind of forgery. The loops on the capital, the slant of the M. It was an imitation of how I signed my name 10 years ago before my arthritis set in. It was an imitation of the signature I used on Gabrielle's birth certificate. Hunter did not just forge my name, he mocked my history. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, a physical manifestation of the rage boiling in my blood. They were not just trying to kill me, they were trying to erase me. They wanted to turn my life's work into a stack of bills. They could blow on cars and vacations and that secret family in Ohio. Mrs. Strickland pointed to a clause in the listing. Look at the occupancy status. Seller guarantees vacancy within 14 days due to medical relocation. Medical relocation. It was a polite way of saying they were going to throw me into an asylum or a grave within 2 weeks. They had put a deadline on my life. They had promised a buyer that I would be gone, deleted, removed like an old piece of furniture. My hand clenched into a fist, slamming onto the mahogany desk. I built this. I growled, my voice vibrating in the quiet office. I laid the foundation with my own hands. I planted those oak trees. I carried my wife over that threshold. How dare they sell my memories like cheap scrap metal? They dare because they are desperate, Mrs. Strickland said, leaning back. Her eyes were cold, calculating. They need money. Atticus, they need it now. The loan sharks in his head are real enough to him, and his other family is expensive. This listing is reckless. It is sloppy. It is a federal crime. And that is how we catch him, I said. The anger cooled, hardening into a weapon. I looked at the phone on her desk. Does the listing have a contact number? Mrs. Strickland nodded. It is a burner phone. We traced it. It is active and it is located in your guest house. Reached for the phone on the desk. My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. I was not the father anymore. I was not the victim. I was the businessman who had crushed competitors for 40 years. I was the shark. I'm going to buy it, I said. Mrs. Strickland raised an eyebrow. You are going to buy your own house. I'm going to make an offer. He cannot refuse. I said, I'm going to be the mystery buyer. I'm going to make him admit to the fraud on a recorded line, and then I am going to close the trap. Mrs. Strickland smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. She tapped her keyboard, setting up the call recording. She handed me a voice modulator, a small black box that would deepen my tone and add a digital rasp. It was unnecessary, theater perhaps, but I could not risk him recognizing the voice of the man he ate breakfast with. I held the receiver to my ear. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, breathless and eager. Hello, this is the seller. It was Hunter. He sounded manic. He sounded like a man on the edge of a cliff, hoping for a parachute. I waited a beat, letting the silence stretch, letting him sweat. I am calling about the property in Silver Creek, I said. My voice dropping an octave, distorted by the modulator. I represent a private investment group. We are interested in a cash acquisition. Hunter let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Oh, that is fantastic, sir. The property is prime real estate. It is a historic build, custom stonework. It is undervalued, frankly. I know what it is. I cut him off, playing the role of the arrogant investor. I do not care about the stonework. I care about the timeline. The listing says, immediate vacancy. Can you guarantee that? There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. He was calculating how fast he could kill me? Yes, Hunter said, his voice gaining strength. The current owner. My father-in-law is very ill. He has advanced dementia. We are moving him to a specialized facility upstate next week. The house will be empty and cleaned out by the closing date. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. He was selling me down the river while I sat 5 miles away listening to his lies. Advanced dementia. He was diagnosing me, burying me, and selling my grave all in one breath. The paperwork, I asked, is the title clean? Does the owner have the capacity to sign? I have power of attorney. Hunter lied smoothly. I handle all his affairs. He trusts me completely. The deed is ready to transfer. I just need the wire. He trusts me completely. The words echoed in the office, a testament to his absolute lack of conscience. He was using my trust as a weapon. He was using my love as a tool to pry open my vault. I am looking at the asking price. I said, $2 million. It is low, suspiciously low. Why the rush? We have a family emergency. Hunter said, the lie slipping out easily. We need to liquidate assets to pay for his medical care. The facility is expensive. We just want to make sure he gets the best treatment. It is all for him, really, all for him. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, a dark, bitter thing. He was selling my house to pay for my murder and claiming it was an act of charity. I will offer you $1.5 million, I said. Cash. Immediate wire transfer today. 1.5. Hunter's voice cracked. That is too low. The land alone is worth more than that. Take it or leave it, I said, channeling the ruthlessness of my youth. I can have the money in your offshore account in an hour. 1.5 million. No questions asked, blind close, I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. He was doing the math. 1.5 million was enough to pay off his debts, enough to buy a new life with Sarah, enough to leave Gabrielle behind. It was freedom, and it was right there. Okay, Hunter whispered. The greed, winning over logic. Okay, we will take it. 1.5 million. I need you to sign the digital contract now, I said. I am sending it to this number. Once I have the signature, the money moves. I hung up the phone and looked at Mrs. Strickland. She was already typing, sending the document to his burner phone. The document was real enough to stand up in court as evidence of fraud, but fake enough that he would never see a dime. It was a confession signed in digital ink. 30 seconds later, a notification pinged on Mrs. Strickland's computer. He signed it, she said, her voice quiet. He signed your name, Atticus, and he signed his own name as the witness. I stared at the screen at the digital signature that sealed his fate. He had just sold a house he did not own to the man he was trying to kill for money that did not exist. He had walked into the cage and locked the door behind him. He thinks he is rich, I said, standing up. He thinks he has won. He is going to check his account, Mrs. Strickland warned. He is going to see that the money has not arrived. Let him check, I said, walking to the window, looking out at the city I loved. The transfer will show as pending, it will show as processing for 24 hours. That is all the time I need to go home, I said, turning back to her. I need to look him in the eye one last time. I need to see the face of a man who thinks he has gotten away with murder. Mrs. Strickland nodded. Be careful, Atticus. He is dangerous now. He has nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose either, I said, picking up my coat. I drove back to the estate, the sun setting behind me, casting long shadows across the road. When I walked into the house, Hunter was in the kitchen opening a bottle of my best vintage wine. He looked euphoric. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. Hey, Atticus, he said, raising his glass. We are celebrating. I closed a big deal today, a huge project for the firm. That is wonderful, Hunter, I said, walking past him, my face a mask of mild confusion. I am happy for you. I went upstairs to my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the camera hidden in the smoke detector. I knew he was watching me on his phone. Downstairs laughing at the old fool. Enjoy your wine, Hunter, I whispered to the empty room. Enjoy it while you can, because tomorrow the bill comes due and the price is going to be higher than you can pay. The next morning, the house felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Hunter had gone into town claiming he needed to finalize the wire transfer paperwork, but I knew he was just avoiding me, terrified that I might change my mind about the house sale. Gabrielle was alone, sitting in the sunroom, staring out at the frozen garden. Her posture was slumped, and she looked small, like a child waiting for punishment. I stood in the doorway watching her for a long moment. My heart ached. It was a physical pain, a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with my blood pressure. This was my little girl. The girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. The girl I taught to ride a bike down this very driveway. I needed to know if she was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of Hunter's manipulation and her own weakness. I needed to know if I could save her, or if she was truly lost to me. I walked into the room, my footsteps heavy on the tile. She looked up, startled, guilt flashing across her face before she masked it with a fragile smile. Daddy, she said, her voice thin. I didn't hear you come in. I sat down in the wicker chair opposite her, avoiding the spot where Hunter sat yesterday. I looked at her hands. They were twisting a tissue, shredding it into tiny white pieces, just like she used to do when she had broken a vase or failed a test. I was thinking about your mother, I said softly, looking out at the gray sky. Do you remember her garden? She loved those roses, even in the winter. She would worry about them. Gabrielle's eyes softened. A ghost of a real memory passed over her face. I remember, she whispered. She used to sing to them. She said it made them grow strong. She sang to you too, I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Gabrielle, look at me. She hesitated, but she lifted her eyes. They were wet, swimming with unshed tears. I know. Things are hard right now, I lied. keeping my voice gentle. I know you and Hunter are desperate, but I want you to know something. If you ever needed to, if you ever felt like you were drowning, you could come back here alone. You could come home. Gabrielle, just you. We could start over. I watched her face closely, looking for a crack in the armor I was offering her, a lifeline, a way out of the pact she had made with the devil I was telling her. Without saying the words that I knew she was in trouble and I was willing to forgive. Gabrielle's lip trembled. She looked at the tissue in her hands, then back at me. For a second I saw it. I saw the doubt, the fear, the realization that she was destroying the only person who had ever truly loved her unconditionally. Daddy, she started, her voice cracking. She took a breath and I leaned in, hoping, praying. I am so tired, Daddy, she whispered. I do not want to move to Florida or wherever Hunter wants to go. I just want to stay here. I want to be home. Then stay, I said, urgency creeping into my tone. Stay here. Let Hunter go do his business. You stay with me. We can fix this. Gabrielle, whatever it is, we can fix it. You do not have to do what he says. She looked at me and the dam broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, genuine tears of conflict and misery. She reached out a hand toward me. I miss Mom, she sobbed. I miss how it used to be. I miss her too. Baby, I said, reaching for her hand. I gripped her fingers tight. They were cold. We can have that peace again, I promised. Just tell me, Gabrielle. Tell me what is going on. Tell me you want to stop this. She opened her mouth to speak. The confession was right there on her tongue. I could see the burden lifting from her shoulders. She was about to choose me. She was about to choose her father. Then the front door slammed. The noise echoed through the house like a gunshot. Gabrielle jumped, snatching her hand away from mine as if she had been burned. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, terror replacing the vulnerability. Honey, I am home. Hunter's voice boomed from the foyer, cheerful and arrogant. The moment shattered. The connection we had built in those few minutes evaporated. Gabrielle wiped her face frantically, composing herself, putting the mask back on. I sat back in my chair, my heart sinking like a stone. He had come back too soon. The window was closed. Hunter walked into the sunroom, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of ozone with him. He looked at Gabrielle, then at me. His eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, sensing that he had almost lost control of his asset. Everything okay in here? He asked, his smile tight, not reaching his eyes. We were just talking about Coretta, I said, my voice flat. Hunter walked over to Gabrielle and put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it. It looked like a gesture of comfort, but I saw her wince. It was a claim of ownership. That is nice, Hunter said. But Gabrielle, can I borrow you for a second? I need help with the packing list for the move. Gabrielle stood up immediately, her obedience automatic, terrifying. Of course, she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. I will be right back, Dad. She followed him out of the room like a dog on a leash. I waited 10 seconds, then I pulled out my phone and put in my earbuds. I switched the audio feed to the kitchen where I knew he would take her. I heard the kitchen door click shut. Then Hunter's voice, low and venomous. What were you doing? He hissed. Nothing, Gabrielle stammered. We were just talking. He was talking about Mom. He is manipulating you. Gabrielle, Hunter's voice was like a snake winding around her mind. He knows you are weak. He is trying to guilt you. He does not love you. He loves the idea of you. He loves controlling you. That is not true, Gabrielle whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. He said, I could stay. Stay! Hunter laughed, a cruel barking sound. Stay here and be his nursemaid until he dies in 20 years. Is that what you want? Change his diapers to listen to his stories about the good old days while your life rots away. And do not think for a second he will leave you anything. He is probably planning to leave it all to some charity for underprivileged youth just to spite us. He wouldn't do that, Gabrielle said. He would, Hunter insisted. He hates me, Gabrielle. You know he does. He hates that you married a white man. He has never accepted me and he punishes you for it. He thinks you are a disappointment. He told me once, you know, he said you were too soft, that you didn't have his grit. I gripped the arms of my chair so hard the wicker cracked. I had never said that. I had never thought that. But Hunter knew exactly where to strike. He was preying on her deepest insecurities, painting me as a tyrant and a racist to justify his own greed. We have to do this, Hunter said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is the only way we get what we deserve. The house sale is processing, but we need him gone before the inspection. We need him gone tonight, Gabrielle, or we lose everything. We lose the money. We lose our future. Do you want to go back to being poor? Do you want to lose me? No, Gabrielle whimpered. Please, Hunter, do not leave me. Then prove it, Hunter said. Do what we discussed. Swap the pills. He trusts you. He won't suspect you. If I do it, he might catch me. But you are his little angel. I cannot kill him. Hunter, Gabrielle sounded like she was choking. You are not killing him, Hunter said soothingly. You are setting him free. He is old. He is in pain. And we need this, Gabrielle. We need to be free. Do it for us. Do it for me. There was a long silence. I held my breath, praying that she would slap him, praying that she would run out of that kitchen and come back to me. Okay, Gabrielle whispered. The word was barely audible, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. Okay, I will do it. I took the earbuds out. My hands were trembling violently. I felt sick, hollowed out. The hope I had felt 10 minutes ago was dead, murdered by my daughter's desperate need for a man who despised her. She had made her choice. She had chosen the abuser over the protector. She had chosen the lie over the truth. I stood up and walked slowly to my study. My legs felt heavy as if I were wading through mud. I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. The screen showed the camera feed from my bathroom. I knew that is where she would go. 5 minutes later, the bathroom door opened. Gabrielle walked in. She looked like a sleepwalker, her face pale, her movements jerky. She was holding a bottle of pills. It was a bottle of high-strength caffeine pills. Hunter used to stay awake during his gaming marathons. She opened the medicine cabinet. Her hand hovered over my prescription bottle, my heart medication, the pills that kept my rhythm steady. She took my bottle down. She opened it and dumped my life-saving medication into the toilet. She flushed it, watching the white pills swirl away. Then she opened the caffeine bottle. She poured the white tablets into my prescription bottle. They looked identical to my heart medication, but for a man with my condition, a high dose of caffeine would induce tachycardia. It would mimic a heart attack. It would kill me. She screwed the cap back on and placed the bottle back on the shelf, exactly where it had been. She looked at her reflection in the mirror for a long moment. I looked at her too, studying the face of my only child. Her eyes were dead empty. She washed her hands, scrubbing them as if she could wash away the sin. Then she turned off the light and walked out. I sat in the dark study, staring at the black screen. The bond was severed. The cord was cut. I did not have a daughter anymore. The woman who walked out of that bathroom was a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had just signed my death warrant. I closed the laptop. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, terrible clarity. I had given her every chance. I had offered her every out. Now there would be no more mercy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the bottle of placebo pills I had prepared days ago. Sugar pills that looked exactly like my medication. I would swap them myself before I took my evening dose. I would let them think their plan was working. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. It was the last tear I would ever shed for Gabrielle Mercer. Tonight, she would watch me die, and tomorrow I would make sure she wished she had. The clock on the mantel chimed 7 times, echoing through the silent living room like a funeral bell. I sat in my wingback leather chair, the bottle of pills heavy in my hand. It was theater pure and simple, but my heart was hammering against my ribs as if it truly were failing. I looked at the bottle. The label said it was my heart medication, but inside were the sugar pills I had swapped an hour ago. Hunter and Gabrielle sat on the sofa opposite me, watching me with the intensity of vultures waiting for a wounded animal to stop moving. They were trying to look casual, but the tension in their shoulders gave them away. They knew what was supposed to happen. They were waiting for the show. I unscrewed the cap. My hands trembled, a deliberate performance of frailty. I shook 2 white pills into my palm. I looked at Gabrielle. She was biting her lip, her eyes fixed on the small white discs that she believed were lethal doses of caffeine. She knew that for a man with my condition, these pills would send my heart into a fatal arrhythmia. She knew she was watching her father commit suicide by her hand, and she said nothing. I put the pills in my mouth and took a long sip of water, swallowing the lie. I set the glass down and waited. The silence stretched tight as a drum skin. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I let my breathing hitch. I brought a hand to my chest, rubbing the sternum, grimacing as if a band of iron were tightening around my lungs. I think I gasped, letting the glass slip from my fingers. It hit the rug with a dull thud, water soaking into the expensive Persian wool. I think something is wrong, Hunter leaned forward, his eyes bright with anticipation. What is it, Atticus? Do you need help? My chest, I wheezed. I slid forward in the chair, my legs kicking out spasmodically. I let my body go limp, sliding off the leather seat and collapsing onto the floor. I lay on my side, clutching my chest, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Help me, I whispered, reaching a hand toward them. Call 911. I watched them through half-closed eyes, waiting for the panic, waiting for the regret, waiting for my daughter to break character and rush to save me. But nobody moved. Hunter sat back on the sofa, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. He crossed his legs casually, getting comfortable. Gabrielle looked away, unable to watch, but she did not stand up. She did not reach for her phone. She just pulled her knees to her chest and covered her ears. I let out a low moan, my body twitching, feigning the onset of cardiac arrest. I was lying on the cold floor of the home I built, looking up at the people I loved, and I saw only executioners. It is happening, Hunter said softly, his voice filled with awe. Look at him, Gabrielle. It is actually working. I continued to gasp, my movements becoming jerky and erratic, mimicking the final struggles of a dying heart. I expected them to leave the room to let me die alone, but they didn't. They wanted to watch. Hunter stood up and walked over to the liquor cabinet. He opened a bottle of scotch, my 25-year-old single malt that I saved for special occasions. He poured 2 glasses, the ice clinking cheerfully in the silent room. He walked back to the sofa and handed a glass to Gabrielle. Drink up, baby, he said. We are celebrating freedom. Gabrielle took the glass, her hands shaking. She took a large gulp, coughing as the liquor burned her throat. Hunter took a sip, savoring it. He walked over to where I lay writhing on the floor and stood over me, looking down like a hunter inspecting a trap. You are a tough old bird, Atticus, Hunter said, conversing with a man he thought was dying. You built a hell of an empire, I will give you that. But you made one mistake. You held on too long. You should have let go. You should have given us the money when we asked. But no, you had to be the patriarch. You had to be the king. I let my eyes roll back in my head, my breathing becoming a wet rattle. I was memorizing every word, every inflection. This was the confession. This was the truth pouring out of him like poison. Do not worry about the business, Hunter continued, swirling his scotch. We are going to sell it fast. Liquidate the fleet, sell the warehouses. I already have a buyer lined up in Jersey. We are going to take the cash and disappear. Atticus, we are going to live like royalty. And you are going to be a tragic story. A sad old man who died of a heart attack alone in his big empty house. He kicked my leg lightly, testing my responsiveness. I went limp. And do not worry about your legacy, he sneered. I am going to erase it. I am going to sell this house to a developer who wants to bulldoze it. They are going to put up condos. Atticus, cheap, plastic condos right over your wife's garden. And your name. No one will remember the name. Mercer in 5 years. It will just be dust. I heard. Gabrielle sobbed from the sofa. Hunter, stop. It is over. He is dying. Just let him die. He forced us to do this, Gabrielle. Hunter snapped, turning on her. He made us desperate. If he had just shared his wealth, we wouldn't be here. But he wanted to control us. He wanted to keep us under his thumb, asking for scraps. Well, the scraps are gone. We are taking the whole feast. I am sorry, Daddy. Gabrielle whispered, her voice thick with tears. I am so sorry. But we need the money. We need a fresh start. I cannot live like this anymore. You are not sorry. Hunter laughed, a cruel, barking sound. You are relieved. Admit it. You hated how he looked at you. You hated how he judged you. You hated knowing you were a disappointment to the great Atticus Mercer. Well, you do not have to be disappointed anymore. You are rich now, baby. We are now rich. He knelt down beside me, bringing his face close to mine. I could smell the scotch on his breath. I could smell the greed. Die, you old fool, he whispered. Die, so I can finally live. I held my breath. I stopped moving completely. I lay there rigid, imitating the stillness of death. I waited for him to check my pulse. I waited for the final confirmation. Hunter stood up. Good riddance, he said. He walked back to the sofa and clinked his glass against Gabrielle's. To us. To the future. To Sarah and the kids. Gabrielle looked up sharply. To who? Hunter froze, realizing his slip-up. To us, he corrected quickly. To our kids. Our future kids. I lay there listening to the silence that followed. The air in the room was thick with death and victory. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. They were drinking my scotch, standing over my body, planning how to spend my life's work. I counted to 10 in my head. 1, 2, 3. Then I opened my eyes. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air. I sat up. Slowly, the movement fluid and strong, the act of the dying man discarded like a costume. Hunter dropped his glass. It hit the floor and shattered scotch, splashing onto his shoes. He stumbled back, his face draining of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked like he was seeing a demon rising from the pit. Gabrielle screamed a high, piercing sound of pure terror. She scrambled backward over the sofa, crashing onto the floor behind it. What? Hunter stammered, his voice a high-pitched squeak. You were dead. I saw you. You stopped breathing. I stood up, brushing the lint from my trousers. I looked at him, my face impassive, my eyes cold and hard. I did stop breathing. Hunter, I said, my voice steady and commanding. It is a technique I learned a long time ago. Meditation breath control. It is very useful for testing the loyalty of those around you. Hunter backed away until he hit the wall, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit or a weapon. He was trembling violently, the arrogance of a moment ago replaced by primal fear. It was a test, I asked, stepping toward him. You tested us. I walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a glass of water. I took a sip, washing the taste of the sugar pills from my mouth. I turned to face them, looking at the two people who had just watched me die and toasted to my demise. Yes, I said. It was a test. The ultimate test. I needed to know if you were strong enough, if you had the ruthless ambition necessary to take over the Mercer Empire. Gabrielle peeked out from behind the sofa, her face a mask of confusion and horror. What do you mean, Daddy? I chuckled. A low, dark sound. I sat down in my chair, the same chair I had just fallen out of. I crossed my legs and looked at them with a mixture of disappointment and admiration. I built this company with blood and grit. I said I did not build it by being nice. I did not build it by being soft. I need an heir who can make the hard choices, an heir who is willing to do whatever it takes to survive, even if it means cutting down their own blood. I looked at Hunter. He was staring at me, his mouth open, trying to process this new reality. He was trying to figure out if I was crazy or if he was. You wanted to kill me, I said calmly. You swapped my pills. You watched me die and you did not call for help. You drank to my death. Hunter swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. You passed, I said. The room went silent again. Hunter blinked. You what? You passed the test, I said, leaning forward. I have been worried. Hunter, I thought you were weak. I thought you were a leech living off my daughter. But tonight, you showed me something. You showed me. You have the killer instinct. You are willing to destroy anything that stands in your way. Even me. That is the kind of man who can run Mercer Logistics. That is the kind of man who can protect my legacy. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was terrified, but his greed was stronger. He wanted to believe me. He wanted to believe that his crime was actually an audition. He wanted the money so badly he was willing to accept this twisted logic. So you are not mad? Hunter asked, his voice tentative. Mad. I laughed. I am impressed. You had the guts to kill the king to take the throne. That is history, Hunter. That is power. Most men would have crumpled. But you poured a drink. I stood up and walked over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling him flinch. But we are not done, I said. The test is not over. You passed the first round, but now we do the formalities. Tomorrow night we are going to have a dinner party, a celebration. I am going to invite the board members, our biggest investors, and the legal team. I am going to announce my retirement, and I am going to sign the company over to you publicly. Hunter's eyes widened. The fear was vanishing, replaced by the familiar glint of avarice. You are going to give me the company. Everything I said, the house, the accounts, the fleet, all of it tomorrow night. But you have to keep it together. You have to play the part of the loving son-in-law until the ink is dry. Can you do that? Yes, Hunter breathed. Yes, Atticus, I can do that. Good, I said. I looked at Gabrielle. She was still on the floor, looking at me as if I were a stranger. She was terrified, but she was also relieved. She thought she had escaped judgment. Get some rest, I said to them both. You have a big night tomorrow. The transfer of power is a delicate thing. We do not want any mistakes. I walked out of the room, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their failed murder plot. They thought they had won the lottery. They thought I was the eccentric old man who valued ruthlessness over life. They had no idea that the dinner party was not a coronation. It was an execution, and every guest I invited would be a witness to their destruction. The house smelled of lilies and roasted duck, a scent of extravagance that masked the stench of the corruption rotting the foundation. Hunter had spared no expense for his coronation. He had hired a catering team from the city, a string quartet that was currently setting up in the foyer, and a sommelier who was decanting bottles of wine that were older than he was. I sat in my study, the door cracked open, watching the flurry of activity. Hunter was moving through the house like a general on the eve of victory, barking orders at the staff, adjusting the placement of the silverware, criticizing the flower arrangements. He was wearing a tuxedo that I knew cost $3,000, likely paid for with the credit card he had stolen from my wallet days ago. Gabrielle came downstairs, her heels clicking on the marble. She was wearing a floor-length red gown that clung to her frame. She looked stunning, but her face was pale, her eyes wide and darting. She stopped in front of a mirror, smoothing her hair over and over again. A nervous tic she had developed as a child when she was hiding a bad report card. She knew what we had done the night before. She knew she had watched me die and done nothing. The guilt was eating at her, but the greed was keeping her upright. She walked over to Hunter and whispered something in his ear. He laughed loud and sharp, slapping her on the rear in a display of ownership that made my jaw clench. You look like a queen baby, Hunter said, his voice carrying to my study. Tonight we take the throne. I closed the door silently. I adjusted my own tie in the reflection of the window. The man staring back at me was not the broken father who had wept over a dead dog. He was Atticus Mercer, the man who had stared down union strikes and hostile takeovers, the man who knew that in business and in war mercy is a weakness. I checked my pockets, the phone, the remote control for the projection screen, the voice recorder. Everything was in place. I walked out of the study leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part of the frail patriarch. One last time, Hunter saw me and strode over a glass of scotch already in his hand. You look good, Atticus, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Ready for the big night? I am. Ready, I said, my voice raspy. I just need to run a quick errand before the guests arrive. Errand Hunter frowned, checking his Rolex. We have people coming in 30 minutes. The board members are early birds. I have a surprise guest, I said. A special investor. I want you to meet. I need to pick them up personally. It is a sign of respect. Hunter's eyes lit up at the word investor. He saw dollar signs. He saw another victim to charm and fleece. Go ahead, he said, grinning. Just do not be late. You do not want to miss your own retirement party. I walked out to the garage and climbed into the Navigator. The leather seat felt cold against my back. I drove out of the estate past the manicured lawns Roosevelt had tended for years, past the gate where he now stood watch, dressed in his Sunday best, ready for his part in the play. I drove to the small executive airport on the outskirts of town. I had arranged for a private car to bring Sarah Miller and her children there from the hotel I had stashed them in. Earlier that day, I had told Sarah that Hunter was receiving a prestigious award for Businessman of the Year and that he wanted to surprise her by flying her in for the ceremony. I told her I was his business partner and that Hunter was too shy to tell her himself. When I pulled up to the curb, Sarah was standing there looking radiant in a blue cocktail dress, holding the hands of her two children. They looked like a catalog family, perfect and wholesome. The boy was wearing a tiny suit, and the girl had a white ribbon in her hair. Sarah's face lit up when she saw me. "Mr. Mercer," she exclaimed as I got out of the car. "I cannot believe Hunter did all this. A private car, a party. He told me he was working hard, but I had no idea he was doing this well." I opened the back door for the children, helping them climb into the booster seats I had installed. "Hunter is a man of many secrets, Sarah," I said, smiling a smile that felt tight on my face. "He wanted tonight to be perfect for everyone." Sarah got into the passenger seat, smoothing her dress. "He misses us so much," she said. "He calls every night, but it is not the same as being there. He says this project in the city is the biggest of his career, that once he closes this deal, we can finally be together all the time." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. He had been promising her a future built on my grave. He had been selling her a fairy tale funded by my daughter's misery. "He is right," I said, pulling onto the highway. "This deal changes everything, Sarah. Tonight you will see exactly what Hunter has been building." The drive back to the estate was filled with Sarah's chatter. She talked about Hunter's kindness, how he sent flowers every week, how he was such a good father to their children. Every word was a dagger twisting in my gut, reminding me of the monster who lived in my house wearing the skin of a good man. I nodded and smiled, asking polite questions, gathering more fuel for the fire burning in my chest. We arrived at the estate, through the service entrance, avoiding the line of luxury cars that were already filling the main driveway. I led Sarah and the children into the guest house, which was connected to the main ballroom by a covered walkway. "Wait here," I told her. "It is a surprise entrance. I want to announce him first and then bring you out when the applause starts. It will be the highlight of the night." Sarah clasped her hands together, her eyes shining. "Oh, that sounds magical, Mr. Mercer. Thank you so much." I left them there in the warm glow of the guest house, oblivious to the hurricane they were about to walk into. I walked down the corridor to the main house, my cane clicking rhythmically on the floor. I entered the ballroom through the side door. The room was full. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the murmur of 50 wealthy people making small talk. I scanned the room. Hunter was holding court near the bar, surrounded by 3 of my oldest board members. He was laughing, gesturing with his drink, playing the role of the dynamic young leader perfectly. Gabrielle was standing a few feet away, accepting congratulations from the wife of my banker. She looked nauseous. Her smile was a rictus of terror pinned in place by fear. I walked over to the main table. The seating chart had been arranged by Hunter, placing himself at the head of the table with Gabrielle on his right and me on his left. He wanted to show the world that he was the new head of the family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 place cards I had printed myself. I walked to the head of the table. While Hunter was distracted by a joke, I swapped the cards. I moved Gabrielle to the seat on my left further down. I placed the card reading Sarah Miller directly to the right of Hunter's seat, the seat of honor, the seat of the wife. I stepped back and looked at the table. It was set for disaster. The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, unaware that they would soon be filled with vinegar instead of wine. I took my seat at the far end of the table, watching the guests filter in. They were the elite of the city, men and women I had done business with for 40 years. They respected me, they feared me, and tonight they would witness my greatest negotiation. Hunter finally noticed me. He broke away from his circle and strode over, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. "You made it," he said, his voice booming. "Great timing. We are about to sit down. Where is the investor?" "She is freshening up," I said calmly. "She will join us in a moment. Let us get everyone seated." Hunter nodded, turning to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, clapping his hands, "if everyone could please find their seats, we have a wonderful dinner prepared and a very special announcement." The guests moved toward the long mahogany table, dragging chairs and finding their names. Hunter walked to the head of the table, beaming. He pulled out the chair for the empty seat on his right, expecting Gabrielle, then he stopped. He looked down at the place. Card. The name Sarah Miller stared up at him, written in elegant calligraphy. His smile froze. It didn't drop. It just turned to stone. His eyes went wide, darting around the room, scanning the faces, searching for the ghost he thought was hundreds of miles away. He looked at me. I was sitting calmly sipping my water, watching him. I raised my glass in a silent toast. Gabrielle walked up behind him, confused. "Hunter, what is wrong?" Why is my seat over there? Hunter didn't answer. He couldn't speak. His face had drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles white. "Please sit down, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the guests. "We have a long night ahead of us, and I am sure you are all starving." Hunter sat down slowly, sinking into the chair as if his legs had given out. He looked at the empty chair beside him, then at the door leading to the guest house. He knew. He knew the game had changed, but he didn't know the rules. The waiters began to pour the wine. The liquid was dark red like blood. Hunter grabbed his glass and downed it in one gulp, his hand shaking so badly a few drops spilled onto his white shirt, staining it crimson. I tapped my spoon against my glass. The sharp ringing sound silenced the room. "Welcome, friends," I said, standing up. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of the people who had helped me build my legacy. "Thank you all for coming tonight. My son-in-law Hunter has brought us all together to mark a transition, a passing of the torch." Hunter stared at his empty plate, sweat beading on his forehead. Gabrielle looked at him, terrified by his reaction. But before we get to business, I continued. "I want to introduce the most important person in Hunter's life, a person he has worked so hard to support, a person who motivates him every day." I pointed to the side door. "Please welcome Mrs. Sarah Miller and her children." The doors opened. Sarah walked in holding the hands of her children, smiling radiantly, expecting applause, expecting love. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the sharp intake of breath from Gabrielle and the sound of a glass shattering as it slipped from Hunter's numb fingers and hit the floor. The dinner party had begun, and the first course was served cold. Sarah took her seat next to a petrified Hunter, placing her children in the chairs beside her. She looked around the room with a wide, naive smile, completely unaware that she was sitting next to a man who was currently hyperventilating. Hunter's face was slick with sweat, his eyes darting between Sarah, Gabrielle, and me. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle while the building burned down around him. He cleared his throat, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floorboards. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hunter began, his voice cracking before he smoothed it out into a forced baritone. "Thank you for that introduction, Atticus. It is true. I have worked hard, very hard, to protect this family, to build a future." He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that made Gabrielle flinch from across the table. Sarah smiled up at him, patting his hand affectionately. The guests exchanged confused glances, whispering behind their napkins. They knew Gabrielle was his wife. Seeing him touch another woman with such familiarity, while his wife sat 5 seats away, was a breach of etiquette they could not comprehend. Hunter ignored the murmurs. He was operating on pure adrenaline and panic. He turned to me, his eyes pleading, his smile a rictus of terror. "But tonight is about you, Atticus," he said, pulling a thick document from his inside jacket pocket. "It is about your legacy, your trust in me." He walked over to my end of the table and placed the papers in front of me along with a heavy gold fountain pen. It was the transfer of ownership, the document that would give him control of Mercer, logistics, my bank accounts, and this estate. "Sign it," Atticus, Hunter urged, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper audible only to me. "Sign it now, and we can end this charade. I will fix everything. Just sign the paper." I looked at the document. The legal language was precise. The trap was ready to spring. All it needed was my signature. Hunter leaned over me, his breath smelling of sour wine and fear. He tapped the signature line, his finger trembling. "Do it," he hissed. "Do it, or I swear I will burn this whole place down." I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand, solid and real. I looked at Hunter, then at the room full of expectant faces. I looked at Gabrielle, who was staring at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "I will sign it, Hunter," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "But first, there is a presentation. I think our shareholders deserve to see exactly what kind of man is taking over this company." Hunter froze. "What presentation?" I pressed the button on the small remote control I had concealed in my palm. At the far end of the ballroom, a massive projection screen began to descend from the ceiling. The motor hummed a low drone that cut through the silence of the room. The lights dimmed automatically, plunging the dinner party into a twilight gloom. Hunter reached for the papers, trying to snatch them back. "No, we do not have time for this. Just sign," I slammed my hand down on the papers, trapping them beneath my palm. "Sit down, Hunter," I commanded. "Watch the show." The projector beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the screen with a stark, high-definition image. It was black and white night vision footage. The timestamp in the corner read 3 days ago. The room went deadly silent. On the screen was my kitchen. It was the morning I had supposedly dropped my coffee. The camera angle was high and wide, capturing the entire room perfectly. Hunter appeared on screen, walking into the frame. He looked around, checking the doors, checking the windows, ensuring he was alone. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The Hunter on screen reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver ring. The camera zoomed in, digital enhancement making the action crystal clear. He held the ring over my world's best dad mug, twisted the mechanism, and let 3 drops of clear liquid fall into the steaming coffee. "What is this?" "Mrs. Vanderhoven, the wife of my biggest investor," asked, her voice trembling. Is that poison?" Hunter lunged toward the screen, shouting. "Turn it off. It is fake. It is I." He made it up. Roosevelt stepped out of the shadows, blocking Hunter's path with his sheer physical presence. "Sit down, boy," Roosevelt growled. On the screen, the video continued. It showed me walking in. It showed me dropping the mug. It showed Roscoe, my loyal dog, running over to lick the spill. Then came the sound. The audio was crisp, amplifying the sickening, retching noise Roscoe made as the neurotoxin hit his system. The guests watched in horror as the dog convulsed on the floor, foaming at the mouth, dying in agony. But the worst part was not the dog dying. It was Hunter watching the camera captured. His face, perfectly. It captured the boredom, the annoyance, the complete lack of empathy as he ate a piece of bacon, while a living creature died feet away from him. "Oh my God," someone whispered in the darkness. The video cut to the scene in the living room, the scene from the night before, my fake heart attack. Hunter appeared on screen, pouring a glass of scotch while I writhed on the floor, clutching my chest. The guests watched as the on-screen Hunter toasted my death. They heard him say the words, "Die, you old fool, die, so I can finally live." Hunter stood in the ballroom, paralyzed. He looked at the faces of the board members, the investors, the people he needed to impress. They were looking at him with revulsion. They were looking at a murderer. "That is not me," Hunter screamed, his voice breaking. "It is a deepfake. He hired a studio. It is all lies." I stood up, pointing at the screen. "It is not a lie, Hunter. It is the audition tape you didn't know you were making, and you passed. Remember, you have the killer." The instinct, I looked at Gabrielle. She was staring at the screen, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had been there. She knew it was real. She knew she was watching her own complicity broadcast to the elite of the city. "But we are not done," I said. "The poison was just the beginning. Now let us see where the money went." I clicked the remote again. The image on the screen changed. The grainy black and white of the kitchen was replaced by the vibrant colors of a sunny afternoon. It was footage taken from a long-range lens, shaky but clear. It showed a suburban house with a white picket fence. A white SUV was parked in the driveway. The license plate was clearly visible. Hunter appeared in the frame, walking up the driveway. He was smiling, a genuine, happy smile that Gabrielle had not seen in years. The door of the house opened. A woman stepped out. It was Sarah Miller. The same Sarah Miller who was currently sitting at the table clutching her children's hands. The Sarah on the screen ran to Hunter, hugging him, kissing him passionately. It was not a friendly kiss. It was the kiss of a lover, a partner, a wife. Then the children ran out. The same children sitting in the ballroom looking confused and scared. On screen they yelled, "Daddy," and jumped into his arms. The sound in the ballroom was a collective intake of breath. Sarah Miller let out a low, keen, a sound of pure heartbreak. She dropped her fork, her eyes wide, staring at the screen where her husband was living a lie. The video continued. It showed Hunter reaching into his car and pulling out a heavy canvas bag, the bag I had given him, the bag filled with $50,000 to pay off the loan sharks. He handed the bag to Sarah. She kissed him again, bouncing the money in her hand, laughing. The video froze on that frame, Hunter kissing Sarah while she held my money. The lights in the ballroom came back up, blindingly bright. The silence was shattered by a scream. It didn't come from Sarah. It came from Gabrielle. She stood up, her chair crashing over backward. She looked at the screen, then at Hunter, then at Sarah sitting across the table. "You have a family," she screamed. her voice tearing her throat. "You have a whole other family." Hunter looked at her trapped. He looked at Sarah, who was pulling her children close, shielding them from him. He looked at the board members who were already pulling out their phones, calling their lawyers, calling the police. Gabrielle ran around the table. Her red dress was a blur of motion. She reached Hunter and tackled him. She didn't slap him. She didn't punch him. She clawed at him, her nails digging into his face, screaming with the rage of a woman who realizes her entire life has been a joke. "You lied to me," she shrieked. "You told me we were doing this for us. You told me we needed the money for our future. But it was for them. It was all for them." She hit him again and again, tearing his tuxedo shirt, leaving red welts on his neck. Hunter pushed her back, stumbling. He looked wild, unhinged. "Get off me, you crazy bitch," he roared. He shoved Gabrielle hard, sending her crashing into the table. Glasses shattered. Silverware clattered to the floor. Sarah stood up, pulling her children toward the exit. "Get away from us," she yelled at Hunter. "Do not come near my kids." Hunter looked at Sarah, desperation in his eyes. "Sarah, baby. Wait, I can explain. It was just business. It was a job. A job." Gabrielle screamed from the floor, blood running from a cut on her arm. "I was a job. My father was a job." She looked up at me, her eyes wild, pleading guilty. "Daddy," she sobbed. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know about them. I helped him kill you because I loved him. I sold you out because I thought we were partners. But he played me. He played me, Daddy." The confession rang out clear and true, heard by every person in the room. She had admitted to conspiracy to murder. She had admitted to everything. I looked down at her, feeling nothing but a cold, hollow sadness. "I know he played you, Gabrielle," I said, "but you let him? You held the cards and you folded?" Hunter looked around the room, realizing there was no way out. The exits were blocked by my security team. The guests were witnesses. The evidence was on the screen. He reached into his jacket pocket, but he didn't pull out a phone or a wallet. He pulled out a gun. It was an old revolver with a pearl handle, a gun that had belonged to my grandfather, a gun I kept in a display case in the study. "Nobody move!" Hunter screamed, waving the gun wildly. "Get back! Back!" The guests screamed, diving under the tables. Sarah shielded her children with her body. Gabrielle froze on the floor, staring at the barrel of the gun. Hunter grabbed me, wrapping his arm around my neck and pressing the cold metal of the barrel against my temple. "I want a car," he shouted, spitting saliva. "I want a car, and I want $5 million transferred to the offshore account right now. Or I swear to God I will paint this wall with his brains." I stood still, feeling his heart hammering against my back. He was shaking so bad the gun was vibrating against my skin. "Do it, Atticus," he hissed in my ear. "Do it or you die." I took a deep breath, smelling his fear, smelling his defeat. "You are not going to shoot me, Hunter," I said calmly. "Oh yes, I will," he screamed. "I have nothing to lose." "You have one problem," I said, my voice steady, loud enough for the room to hear. "That gun, it is an antique." "So what?" Hunter yelled. "It shoots no hunter," I said. "I took the firing pin out 10 years ago. It is a paperweight." Hunter froze. The gun wavered. "You are lying," he whispered. "Try it," I challenged. "Try it and see what happens." Hunter pulled the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. The sound was small, insignificant. Click. 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 He pulled it again and again, panic rising. Roosevelt stepped forward, swinging the heavy garden shovel he had hidden behind the curtain. The metal blade hit Hunter in the back of the knees with a sickening crunch. Hunter screamed, dropping me and collapsing to the floor. Roosevelt stood over him, the shovel raised, ready to strike again. "It is over," I said, straightening my tie. The ballroom doors burst open. Police officers in tactical gear swarmed the room, guns drawn, yelling orders. I looked down at Hunter writhing on the floor, his empire of lies crumbling into dust. I looked at Gabrielle sobbing in the wreckage of the dinner table. The party was over, and justice was about to be served. The image on the projection screen froze on the frame of Hunter kissing Sarah Miller in that sunlit driveway, and for a moment the ballroom was so silent I could hear the hum of the projector fan overhead. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of 100 people processing a betrayal so absolute it sucked the air out of the room. Sarah Miller sat at the table, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and heartbreak. She looked from the screen to Hunter, then back to the screen, trying to reconcile the man she loved with the man standing in a tuxedo who had just tried to steal a company. But the silence was broken, not by Sarah, but by Gabrielle. My daughter stood up slowly, her chair scraped against the wood floor, a harsh dragging sound that made everyone jump. She was staring at the screen at the image of her husband holding another woman, looking happier than he ever looked with her. Her face was devoid of color, a pale mask of shock that was rapidly cracking under the pressure of a rage so pure it looked like madness. Gabrielle let out a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. It was a guttural, animalistic noise of pain ripping through her chest. She looked at Hunter, who was still frozen, his eyes locked on the screen, his face slick with sweat. "You have a family," she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it vibrated in the air. "You have a whole other family." Hunter turned to her, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of placation. "Gabrielle, listen to me. It is not what it looks like." "It was a long time ago, liar," she screamed. The word tore from her throat, raw and bloody. "It was last week. I saw the date on the video. You were with her last week. You told me you were meeting with the lawyers. You told me you were securing our future." She lunged across the space between them, moving with a speed I had never seen in her. She did not slap him like a scorned woman in a movie. She attacked him with the feral desperation of a wounded creature. She clawed at his face, her nails digging into his skin, leaving bright red streaks across his cheeks. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive tuxedo jacket and shook him, her screams dissolving into incoherent shrieks of fury. Hunter stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, trying to shield his face. "Get off me!" he shouted, pushing at her arms. "Gabrielle, stop it. You are making a scene. I do not care," Gabrielle howled. She struck him in the chest with her fists again and again, heavy thuds that echoed in the room. "You used me. You made me sell my soul for you. You made me betray my father. And you were laughing at me the whole time. You were building a life with her, with my money." The guests were on their feet now. Some were backing away, terrified by the violence exploding in the center of the room. Others were watching with morbid fascination, unable to look away. Sarah Miller stood up, pulling her terrified children behind her, shielding their eyes from the sight of their father being attacked. Hunter managed to grab Gabrielle's wrists, pinning them to her sides. He was stronger than her, and he used his weight to force her back, slamming her against the edge of the table. Silverware clattered to the floor, crystal glasses shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the parquet. "Calm down, you crazy bitch," Hunter hissed, his face inches from hers, spit flying from his lips. "You are embarrassing yourself. Everyone is watching." "Let them watch," Gabrielle screamed, twisting in his grip. She spat in his face, a glob of saliva landing on his cheek. "I want them to watch. I want them to... Know what you are. You are a parasite. You are a monster." She kicked him hard in the shin, and Hunter yelped, letting go of one of her wrists. She used the freedom to rake her nails down his neck, drawing blood. "I gave you everything," she sobbed, swinging wildly. "I gave you my dignity. I gave you my father's trust. I destroyed my family for you." Hunter shoved her hard, sending her stumbling back into a waiter who dropped a tray of champagne flutes. The crash was deafening, but it did not stop her. She regained her balance, her hair wild around her face, her red dress torn at the shoulder. She looked deranged, broken, and terrifying. I looked at my daughter and I felt a profound, hollow sadness. This was the girl I had raised, the girl who used to catch fireflies in the garden. Now she was a woman tearing herself apart in front of the city's elite, destroying what little was left of her humanity, because the lie she had lived for was finally exposed. Gabrielle looked around the room, her eyes wild and unfocused. She saw the guests staring at her. She saw the judgment, the pity, the revulsion, and then she saw me. I was standing at the head of the table, leaning on my cane, watching her with a stone face. "Daddy," she cried, turning toward me, her hands reaching out as if to grab a lifeline. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know about her. I said nothing. I just looked at her, letting the weight of my gaze crush her excuses. "I did it for us," she screamed, turning back to the crowd, addressing the room as if she were on trial. "I did it because I loved him." She pointed a shaking finger at Hunter, who was wiping the blood from his neck, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. "He told me we had no choice." She shouted her confession, pouring out like vomit. He told me you were going to cut us off. He told me we had to take the money now, or we would lose everything. I helped him poison you, Daddy. I helped him." A collective gasp went through the room. The guests, who had been whispering amongst themselves, fell silent again. Horrified by the admission, I put the pills in the bottle. Gabrielle continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I crushed them up. I watched him pour the liquid into your coffee. I knew what it was. I knew it would hurt you. And I let him do it, because he said it was the only way. He said we needed the inheritance to be free." She fell to her knees, her red dress pooling around her like blood. She grabbed the tablecloth, pulling it down, dragging plates and centerpieces with it. "I agreed to the nursing home," she sobbed, hitting the floor with her fist. "I signed the papers for the fake doctor. I told everyone you were crazy. I made up the stories about you forgetting things. I gaslighted you, Daddy. I made you doubt your own mind." Hunter lunged forward, trying to cover her mouth. "Shut up, Gabrielle! Shut up! Get away from me!" she shrieked, scrambling backward on her hands and knees. "I will not shut up. Not anymore. I sold my father for you. I sold the only man who ever loved me for a liar, who was using me to feed another family." She looked up at Sarah Miller, who was standing near the door, shaking, crying silently. "He used your bank account," she yelled at Sarah. "He used my father's money to pay for your house. He used my inheritance to buy your kids' clothes. Did you know that? Did you know you were living on blood money?" Sarah shook her head violently, covering her ears, backing away toward the exit. Gabrielle turned back to me, her face streaked with mascara and tears. "I am a monster," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am just like him. I wanted the money. Daddy. I wanted the house. I wanted to be rich, and I wanted him to love me. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he would finally love me the way he loves her." She pointed at the screen where the frozen image of the kiss mocked her. "But he never loved me. He hated me. He hated us. He called you names behind your back. He called you the old nigger who wouldn't die." The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and hateful. It was the final nail, in the coffin of his character, the final proof of the contempt he held for the family he had infiltrated. The black guests in the room stiffened their expressions, hardening. The white guests looked down, ashamed. Hunter looked around the room and saw that he had lost everyone. The board members looked at him with disgust. The investors turned their backs. Even the waiters looked at him like he was something they had scraped off their shoes. He was exposed naked in his greed and his hatred. He looked at Gabrielle, who was still on the floor sobbing, confessing her sins, begging for a forgiveness. I could not give, and his fear turned to rage. "You stupid cow!" Hunter roared. He stepped forward and kicked her. It was not a shove. It was a vicious kick to her ribs, the act of a man who had lost all control, who wanted to hurt the thing that had exposed him. Gabrielle curled into a ball, screaming in pain. The guests shouted in protest, some of the men stepping forward. "You ruined everything," Hunter shouted, standing over her, his fists clenched. "You were supposed to be the easy mark. You were supposed to be the weak link. All you had to do was keep your mouth shut and sign the papers. But you couldn't even do that. You pathetic, needy little waste of space." He reached down and grabbed her by the hair, hauling her up to her knees. Gabrielle clawed at his hands, but he didn't let go. He shook her, his face twisted into a snarl of pure malice. "I should have killed you too," he hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. "I should have pushed you down those stairs when I had the chance. It would have been cleaner." He raised his hand, backhanding her across the face with a sickening crack. Gabrielle fell back, hitting the floor hard and staying there. Hunter stood, panting. His tuxedo torn, his face scratched, his eyes wild. He looked at me, then at the angry men closing in around him. He realized he was trapped. He realized the game was over, and he realized that he was not walking out of this room a rich man. He reached into his jacket pocket. His hand came out, holding the antique revolver, the pearl handle gleaming under the chandelier. Back he screamed, waving the gun at the guests. "Get back, all of you!" The crowd scrambled back, screams erupting as people dove under tables and behind pillars. Sarah Miller dragged her children out the side door, disappearing into the night. Hunter turned the gun on me. His hand was shaking, but the barrel was aimed squarely at my chest. "You did this!" he screamed, spitting saliva. "You old devil! You set me up!" I stood my ground, leaning on my cane, watching the man who had destroyed my family self-destruct. He was a cornered rat, dangerous and desperate. But I knew something he didn't. I knew the gun was empty. "Go ahead, Hunter," I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "Finish it." Hunter cocked the hammer, the mechanical click echoing in the silent ballroom. He looked at me with hatred, with fear, with the knowledge that his life was over. "Say goodbye, Atticus," he whispered. I looked him in the eye and waited for the click that would end his world. Hunter clamped his arm around my neck so tight I could feel the pulse in his wrist hammering against my windpipe. The barrel of the antique revolver dug into my temple, cold and unforgiving. The smell of him was overwhelming, a toxic mix of expensive scotch, nervous sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. The ballroom had dissolved into pandemonium. Guests were scrambling over chairs, diving beneath the heavy mahogany tables, and pressing themselves against the silk-lined walls, desperate to put distance between themselves and the man, unraveling in the center of the room. Sarah Miller was gone, having fled with her children the moment the gun appeared, leaving Hunter alone with the wreckage of his double life. "Get back!" Hunter screamed, his voice cracking and raw. He swung the gun wildly toward the crowd before jamming it back against my skull. "Do not think I won't do it. I have nothing left to lose. Absolutely nothing." I felt him dragging me backward, his steps jerky and uncoordinated. We moved toward the main doors, the heels of my shoes scraping against the polished floor. I did not struggle. I did not fight his grip. I let him think. He had the power. I let him think he was in control of my body because I knew I was still in control of his mind. "I want a car out front in 2 minutes," Hunter shouted, spitting saliva onto my cheek. "And I want the wire transfer authorized. Atticus, $5 million to the Cayman account. Do it now or your brains will be the last thing these people see tonight." The security team I had hired stood by the doors, their hands hovering near their holsters, but they did not draw. They knew the protocol. They saw the gun at my head, and they froze. Waiting for a signal, I gave them nothing. I just stared straight ahead, my face a mask of stone. "You are making a mistake, Hunter," I said, my voice calm, vibrating in his chest where he pressed against me. "You cannot escape this. There are 50 witnesses here. The police are already on the perimeter. You are digging a hole you cannot climb out of." "Shut up," Hunter hissed, tightening his grip on my throat. "I did not ask for your advice, old man. I asked for my money. It is my money. I earned it. I put up with your arrogance. I put up with your daughter. I put up with this pathetic life for 3 years. I earned every cent." He dragged me past the table where Gabrielle still lay on the floor. She was curled in a fetal position, her red dress torn and stained with blood from where he had hit her. She looked up as we passed, her eyes vacant and broken. She saw her husband holding a gun to her father's head, and she did not move. She did not scream. She just watched as if she were watching a movie that had nothing to do with her. The disconnect was complete. Her mind had shattered under the weight of the truth. We reached the center of the room beneath the massive crystal chandelier. Hunter stopped, panting heavily. He used me as a human shield, turning us in a slow circle, keeping the gun trained on the terrified guests. "Open the laptop." He yelled at Mrs. Strickland, who was standing by the projector screen, brave and defiant. "Open it and make the transfer." Mrs. Strickland looked at me, her eyes asking for permission. I gave her a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. "Do not do it." Hunter saw the look. He jammed the gun harder into my temple, the metal biting into my skin, pain radiating through my skull. "Do it!" he screamed, "or he dies. Right now, I will count to 3. 1. I felt his finger tighten on the trigger. I could feel the mechanism shifting, the tension building in the spring. 2. The room held its breath. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. "Hunter," I said, my voice cutting through the panic, "before you pull that trigger, there is something you need to know." "What?" Hunter snapped, sweat dripping from his forehead into my eyes. "That gun," I said. "It belonged to my grandfather. He carried it in the war. It is a piece of history. It is worth more than your car. I do not care." "About the history," Hunter yelled, his hand shaking so bad the gun rattled against my head. "You should," I continued, keeping my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather, "because my grandfather taught me that a weapon is only dangerous if it is maintained. When Gabrielle was born, I was afraid. She was a curious child, always exploring. I did not want an accident in the house." Hunter stopped counting. He was listening despite himself, his greed for life making him hesitate. "So I took it to a gunsmith," I said. "I had him remove the firing pin. It looks real. It feels real. The cylinder rotates, the hammer cocks, but it cannot fire, Hunter. It is a paperweight. It is a toy for a man who likes to play. Pretend. Hunter froze. The arm around my neck went rigid. I could feel the doubt seeping into him, cold and paralyzing. "You are lying," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You are trying to trick me." "Am I?" I asked. I chuckled, a low, dry sound. "You have been living in my house for 3 years, Hunter. You have, Hunter. You searched my office. You have been through my safe. Did you ever find bullets? Did you ever find a box of ammunition?" Hunter's breathing hitched. He was scanning his memory frantically, searching for a detail he might have missed. He realized in that second that he had never seen bullets. He had just assumed the gun was loaded because it was in the display case. "It is loaded now," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I found bullets in the basement." I laughed again, louder this time. "Those were for the hunting rifle." "Hunter, the caliber is different. Look at the cylinder. Look at the rounds." Hunter hesitated. He wanted to look, but he couldn't take his eyes off the security guards. He was trapped in a paradox of his own making. If he looked, he lost his advantage. If he didn't look, he might be holding a useless piece of metal. "I am not lying, Hunter," I said. "I do not lie to enemies. I destroy them. Go ahead. Pull the trigger. See what happens." Hunter let out a sound of pure frustration, a scream of rage and impotence. He pressed the barrel so hard against my head I thought my skull would crack. "Die!" he screamed, and he pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was small, sharp, and infinitely final. It was the sound of a hammer hitting nothing but air. It was the sound of his death sentence. Hunter gasped. He pulled the trigger again. Click. And again. Click. 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 He stared at the gun in his hand, his eyes wide with horror. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the true depth of the mistake he had made. He saw that he had never been in control. He saw that he had been playing a game where the rules were written by me and the outcome was decided before he even rolled the dice. "The gun is empty," I whispered. "And so are you." Hunter dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, spinning away across the polished wood. He let go of my neck, stepping back. His hands raised in a pathetic surrender. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. "It was a mistake," he stammered, backing away, tears streaming down his face. "Atticus, please, I was not going to do it. I just wanted to scare you. I am sick. I need help." He turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The doors were blocked, the windows were sealed. He was a rat in a cage, and the trap was about to snap shut. From the shadows behind the heavy velvet curtains, a figure emerged. It was Roosevelt. He moved with a speed that belied his 70 years. His face was a mask of grim determination. In his hands he held a long-handled spade from the garden shed, the metal blade gleaming under the chandelier lights. Hunter saw him and shrieked, turning to flee in the other direction. But Roosevelt was faster. He swung the spade in a low arc, putting his back and his shoulders into the blow. The flat of the blade connected with the back of Hunter's knees with a sickening crunch. It was the sound of bone meeting steel. Hunter's legs buckled instantly. He went down screaming, hitting the floor. Face first, his arms flailing, Roosevelt did not stop. He stepped over Hunter, raising the spade again, ready to strike if the man tried to rise. "Stay down." Roosevelt growled, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder. Hunter curled into a ball, sobbing, clutching his legs. "I cannot walk. You broke my legs." "You are lucky I did not break your neck," Roosevelt said, standing over him, a guardian angel with a garden tool. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing the lapels. I reached up and touched my temple, where the gun had been. It was tender, bruising already, but I was alive. I walked over to where the gun lay on the floor and kicked it away. At that moment, the main doors burst open. The police had arrived. A SWAT team in tactical gear flooded the room, rifles raised, shouting commands. "Get down! Everyone down!" The guests dropped to the floor, covering their heads. I remained standing, leaning on my cane, watching the inevitable conclusion of the drama. Officers swarmed Hunter, pulling his hands behind his back and cuffing him roughly. He screamed in pain as they manipulated his injured legs, but they showed no mercy. They dragged him up, hauling him toward the door, his feet dragging uselessly behind him. "Check the woman," I said, pointing to Gabrielle. "She is an accomplice. She confessed to conspiracy to commit murder. 2 officers moved toward Gabrielle. She did not resist. She did not run. She simply held out her hands, her wrists limp and accepting. The officer snapped the cuffs on her, pulling her up from the floor. She looked at me as they led her away. Her eyes were dead empty, voids where a soul used to be. "Daddy," she whispered as she passed me. "I am sorry." I looked at her and felt nothing. The well of my love had run dry, drained by her betrayal. "Save it for the judge," I said, turning my back on her. I watched them drag my family out of the house into the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. The ballroom was a wreck, shattered glass, overturned tables, the remnants of a celebration that never happened. But as I stood there surrounded by the ruins of my personal life, I felt a strange sense of peace. The cancer had been cut out. The wound would bleed and it would scar, but I would survive. I looked at Roosevelt, who was leaning on his spade watching the police work. We nodded to each other, a silent acknowledgement of a battle won. I walked over to the table and picked up a glass of wine that had miraculously survived the chaos. I raised it to the empty room. "To loyalty," I whispered, and I drank the wine, savoring the taste of victory amidst the ashes. The visiting room at the county detention center smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a smell of despair that permeated the cinder block walls and the scratched plexiglass dividers. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor, my hands folded calmly on the stainless steel ledge, waiting for the prisoner number 8492 to be escorted in. It had been 3 weeks since the night at the estate, 3 weeks since I watched the police drag my family away in handcuffs. The silence in my house had been restorative, but today I had to break it one last time. The heavy steel door on the other side of the glass buzzed and clicked open. Gabrielle walked in. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once her pride and joy, was matted and pulled back into a messy bun. Her face was scrubbed of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes and a complexion that looked gray in the harsh fluorescent light. She shuffled toward the booth, her ankles shackled, moving with the heavy, defeated gait of a woman who knows her life is over. She sat down and picked up the black phone receiver, her hands trembling. I picked up mine, the plastic cool against my ear. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking. It sounded small, tinny through the speaker. "I am so glad you came. I knew you would come." I looked at her, examining her face for any sign of the daughter I had raised. I looked for the little girl who used to bake cookies with Coretta. I looked for the young woman who had graduated with honors, but all I saw was the stranger who had crushed pills into my coffee. I saw the woman who had watched me writhe on the floor and poured herself a drink. "I am here, Gabrielle," I said, my voice flat, "to hear what you have to say. You used your one phone call to my lawyer, claiming you had crucial information." Gabrielle leaned forward, pressing her hand against the glass, tears filling her eyes. "I do. Daddy, I have information that changes everything. I need you to get me out of here. You have to drop the charges. You have to talk to the district attorney." I leaned back slightly. "Why would I do that, Gabrielle? You confessed. In front of 50 witnesses, you admitted to conspiracy to commit murder." "Because I am pregnant," she blurted out. The words rushed out of her desperate and wet. "I am pregnant with your grandchild, Daddy. I took a test in the infirmary yesterday. It is positive I am going to have a baby, a Mercer." She rubbed her stomach, staring at me with wide, pleading eyes. "You cannot let your grandchild be born in prison," she sobbed. "You cannot let the baby grow up in the system. You have to save us, Daddy. Not for me. Do it for the baby. It is a boy. I can feel it. It is a little boy who will carry your name." I watched her performance. It was good. It was emotional. It pulled at the heartstrings of any man who wanted a legacy. But I was not just any man anymore. I was a man who had done his homework. I looked down at the manila envelope I had brought with me. I opened the clasp slowly, deliberately. "You are pregnant," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is true. My lawyer received the medical report from the jail this morning." Gabrielle let out a sob of relief. "See, I told you. You have to help me. We can start over. I will raise him right, Daddy. I will raise him in the big house, just like you raised me." I pulled a document out of the envelope and pressed it against the glass. But there is something you need to know about that. Baby, I said. Gabrielle squinted, reading the paper. It was a medical file, redacted but clear. What is this? She asked, confused. This is Hunter's medical file, I said. I got it from Sarah Miller, his other wife. It turns out Hunter had a vasectomy 6 years ago. Gabrielle. He did it right after his daughter was born. He didn't want any more children. He is sterile. Gabrielle froze. Her hand fell from her stomach. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a corpse. That is a lie, she whispered. He told me he wanted kids. He told me we were trying. He lied, I said. He lied about everything. But here is the part you really need to understand. If Hunter is sterile, then who is the father of your baby? Gabrielle stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I pulled out another photo from the envelope. It was a picture of a man, a muscular, handsome man with dark hair wearing a gym t-shirt. Do you recognize him? I asked. Gabrielle gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. It is Marcus. She whispered, my personal trainer. Yes, I said. Marcus Hunter hired him, didn't he? Hunter paid for your sessions. He insisted you go 3 times a week. He told you that you needed to get in shape for the wedding. He encouraged you to get close to him. Gabrielle was shaking her head violently, tears flying from her eyes. No, that is not. Hunter set you up. Gabrielle, I said, my voice hard as stone. He knew he couldn't get you pregnant, and he knew that without a child, his hold on the Mercer fortune was weak. He needed an heir. He needed a biological link to me that would make it impossible for me to cut you off. So he hired Marcus. He paid Marcus $5,000 to seduce you, to make you feel special, to sleep with you. It was a mistake, Gabrielle screamed into the phone. It only happened twice. We were drunk. Hunter didn't know. He couldn't have known. Hunter arranged it. I cut her off. I have the Venmo transactions. Gabrielle, I have the texts between Hunter and Marcus. Hunter was pimping you out. He wanted you pregnant by anyone so he could pass the baby off as his own and secure the inheritance. He didn't care about you. He didn't care about the baby. He just needed a prop. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She slumped against the metal shelf, her eyes wide and vacant. The man she had destroyed her life for, the man she had tried to kill her father for, hadn't just used her for money. He had sold her body. He had engineered her infidelity just to secure a paycheck. He knew, she whispered. The words were barely audible. He knew about Marcus, and he didn't care. He cared very much, I corrected. He was banking on it. That baby in your stomach. It is not a Mercer. It is not a symbol of hope. It is the final receipt for a transaction you didn't even know you were a part of. Gabrielle let out a scream that curdled the blood. It was a sound of pure shattered madness. She dropped the phone, letting it swing by its metal cord, banging against the wall. She stood up and slammed her fists against the glass, screaming incoherently. You are lying. You are lying. I loved him. He loved me. I sat there watching her unravel, watching the final wall of her delusion crumble into dust. She had lost her father. She had lost her freedom, and now she had lost the one thing she thought was real, her love story. Guards rushed into the room on her side. They grabbed her by the arms, pulling her away from the glass. She fought them, kicking and screaming, her face twisted into a mask of pure agony. Daddy, help me, she shrieked, her voice faint through the glass. Daddy, please kill me, just kill me, I do not want to live. I picked up my papers and slid them back into the envelope. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. I looked at her one last time. She was being dragged backward, her heels skidding on the linoleum, her eyes locked on mine, begging for an end to the pain. You made your choice, Gabrielle, I said, though she couldn't hear me. You chose him, and this is what he gave you. I hung up the phone. The click was final. I turned and walked out of the visiting room. The screams faded as the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me. I walked down the long corridor, past the guards, past the checkpoints, out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I walked to my car where Roosevelt was waiting. He saw my face and he didn't ask any questions. He just started the engine. Is it done, sir? He asked as I buckled my seatbelt. It is done, I said, looking out the window at the barbed wire fences. I had lost a daughter that day, in the truest sense. She was not dead, but the person I knew, the person I loved, was gone. consumed by her own weakness and the cruelty of the man she chose. "Drive Roosevelt," I said. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. I looked forward at the road ahead, at the empty passenger seat beside me, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The cancer was gone. The rot had been cut out. And for the first time in a long time, I was just a man, driving down a road with the rest of his life ahead of him. The for sale sign on the front lawn was not just a piece of painted wood. It was a tombstone marking the death of a dynasty. I stood on the porch of the estate one last time, watching the movers load the final pieces of furniture into the truck. These were not the antiques Hunter had coveted or the expensive sofas Gabrielle had lounged on. Those had been auctioned off weeks ago, with the proceeds going directly into a blind trust. The truck was filled with simple things. My favorite leather chair, Coretta's gardening books, the old radio. Roosevelt and I used to listen to baseball games on. I walked through the empty halls. The sound of my footsteps echoed against the bare walls, stripping away the grandeur, leaving only a cold, cavernous shell. The house felt smaller without the lies filling it up. It felt sterile. I walked to the door of the basement. The padlock Roosevelt and I had installed was still there, but now the door was reinforced. With steel bars welded into the frame, I had sealed it shut. No one would ever go down there again. No one would ever sit in the dark and plot the destruction of a father. The secrets of that room were buried alongside the memories of the daughter who had betrayed me. Mrs. Strickland met me in the driveway holding a clipboard. She looked at the house, then at me. Her face was professional, but her eyes held a glimmer of sadness. "The wire transfer is complete, Atticus," she said. "The developers closed the deal this morning. They are paying full asking price in cash. They plan to demolish the main structure within the month." "Good," I said, looking at the stone facade I built with my own hands. "It feels right. Tear it down. Let the earth reclaim it." I signed the final deed, handing over the keys without a tremor in my hand. I thought I would feel pain. I thought I would feel the crushing weight of loss, leaving the place where I had lived for 40 years. But as I walked toward my car, all I felt was a lightness, a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted from weary shoulders. The house was just wood and stone now. It was an asset that had become a liability. And like any good businessman, I had liquidated it. I got into the car and looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. Roscoe wasn't there to put his head on my lap. The grief hit me then, sharp and sudden. A reminder that while I had won the war, I had paid a heavy price. But as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roared to life, a sound of power and forward motion. I was leaving the ghosts behind. I was driving away from the wreckage of the Mercer family and towards something I had not had in a long time, a future that belonged only to me. 6 months later, I stood in the center of a bustling office in downtown Chicago. The sign on the glass door read, "The Coretta Mercer Foundation, Legal Aid and Protection for the Elderly." The space was alive with activity. Phones were ringing, lawyers were arguing, and conference rooms and social workers were comforting clients in the waiting area. It was not a quiet place. It was a war room. I walked through the bullpen, nodding to the staff. They didn't treat me like a frail old man. They treated me like the commander-in-chief. Mrs. Strickland walked beside me, briefing me on the weekly stats. "We have 3 new cases this morning," she said. "A 75-year-old man whose son forged his power of attorney and a widow whose daughter is trying to evict her from her own home." "We take them both," I said firmly. "We take them all. Spare no expense. Hire more investigators if we need to." I walked into my office. A modest room with a view of the street. Sitting in the chair opposite my desk was a woman. She looked to be about my age, her hands calloused from work, her eyes filled with a terror I recognized intimately. Her name was Clara, and she was holding a stack of eviction notices. "Mr. Mercer," she whispered, clutching her purse. "My son said he was helping me with the bills. He said I just needed to sign some papers to lower my taxes. Now the bank says I do not own my house anymore. They say he sold it out from under me 3 months ago." I looked at Clara, and I saw myself. I saw the confusion, the disbelief, the heartbreak of realizing that the person you gave life to has stolen yours. I stood up and walked around the desk. I did not offer her a tissue. I offered her a battle plan. "Clara, look at me," I said. My voice steady. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "You are not alone," I said. "You are not stupid, and you are not weak. You were betrayed by someone who exploited your love. That stops today." I pushed a button on my intercom. Send in the forensic accounting team, I said, and get Roosevelt on the line. We have a son who needs to be taught a lesson. Clara stared at me, hope beginning to flicker in her eyes. You can get my house back. I am going to get your house back, Clara, I said. And then I am going to make sure your son never touches a dime of your money again. We have a team of sharks in the next room and they are very hungry. Watching her straighten her spine, watching the fear turn into resolve gave me a satisfaction that no business deal ever had. This was my legacy now. Not a stone house, not a fleet of trucks, but this. The Coretta Mercer Foundation was a fortress for the forgotten. It was a shield for the vulnerable. I was using Hunter's greed to fund his own worst nightmare, a world where the elderly fight back. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, I sat in a folding chair on the end of a wooden dock. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The water of the lake was still like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the first few stars appearing in the twilight. This was my new home. A small cabin 3 hours north of the city, tucked away in the woods. It was simple. It was quiet. It was safe. There were no cameras here. No hidden microphones, no blueprints, marked with red ink. Roosevelt sat in the chair next to me, his fishing line cast out into the dark water. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We sat in the comfortable silence of two men who have seen the worst of humanity and survived it. I watched the bobber floating on the surface, thinking about the word family. For 68 years, I thought family was blood. I thought it was the people who shared your DNA, the people who bore your name. I thought it was an obligation, a contract written in biology that could never be broken. I was wrong. Family is not blood. Family is loyalty. Family is the person who stands beside you when the gun is at your head. Family is the person who digs the trench with you, who hands you the shovel, who never asks for a dime in return. I looked at Roosevelt, the man who had saved my life not once but a dozen times in the last year. He wasn't my employee anymore. He was my brother, my partner. You thinking about her? Roosevelt asked, his voice rumbling low like distant thunder. I looked away from the water, up at the trees silhouetted against the sky. I am thinking about who she could have been, I said. I am thinking about the little girl who used to chase fireflies, and I am mourning her. But I am not thinking about the woman in the cell. That woman is a stranger. Roosevelt nodded slowly, reeling in his line a few inches. You did right by her, Atticus, he said. You gave her life, and when she tried to take yours, you gave her justice. That is more than most fathers would do. I took a sip of the iced tea sitting on the cooler between us. It was cold and sweet. I have a new family now. Roosevelt, I said, gesturing to the woods, to the quiet cabin, to the peace that surrounded us. I have the work. I have the people we help. And I have this. Roosevelt grunted a sound of agreement. The fish are biting tonight, he said. Let them bite, I said, leaning back in my chair and closing my eyes. I listened to the wind in the trees, the lap of the water against the dock, the steady breathing of my friend. I felt the weight of the past fading, dissolving into the darkness. I was Atticus Mercer. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had lost a daughter, but I had found my life. And as I sat there under the vast open sky, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The line on my fishing rod tugged sharp and hard. I opened my eyes and grabbed the pole. Feeling the fight on the other end, I smiled. I got one, I said. Roosevelt chuckled. Reel him in. Sir, reel him in. I started to reel the mechanism, clicking a steady rhythm of victory. The struggle was there. The resistance was real, but I was strong. I was ready, and I wasn't letting go. For 40 years, I measured my wealth in assets and my legacy in bloodline. I was wrong. The greatest tragedy wasn't the betrayal itself, but how long I allowed it to continue in the name of family. I learned that toxic roots must be severed no matter how deep they go, or they will poison the whole tree. True family isn't determined by DNA, but by who stands next to you in the trenches when the firing starts. Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm, even if they call you father. Your dignity is the only estate that truly matters. If you have ever had to make the hard choice to cut off a toxic family member to save your own peace, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.